Chapter 945. When Su Fengnian returned to the mansion, he did not climb over the wall again. This greatly disappointed Song Huangmei, who had been waiting at the foot of the wall. It was very late when she learned from the steward that His Royal Highness walked out of the mansion step by step. Miss Song exclaimed and ran out of the Li mansion. The steward saw this and muttered to himself. This Miss Song was too rash. Compared to the quiet and virtuous miss of the Li mansion, she was thousands of miles away. The steward then began to daydream. Everyone in Beiliang knew that Master Hanlin and His Royal Highness were brothers who grew up together. If Miss Song could become the consort of the King of Beiliang in the future, in addition to the fact that Master was already the administrator, then the Li family would be worthy of the title of the most powerful family in Beiliang. The old steward shook his head. Alas, it was a pity that Miss Song was fooling around with that Guo Dahan disciple. A peony flower stuck in cow dung. Su Fengnian lay on the bench in the pavilion and looked up at the starry sky. He turned a blind eye to the girl who had sneaked into the pavilion. The girl was really a hard-working heroine. She was able to control her temper. She gritted her teeth and endured the cold for an hour without making a sound. Su Fengnian sat up and asked with a smile, "Miss Song, do you need something from me?" Song Huangmei, who had shrunk to the side of the pavilion to avoid the cold, jumped in fright. Her face, which was not too beautiful, turned red. She lowered her head and clutched the corner of her clothes. She no longer had the heroine demeanor that she had when she blocked him with her sword at the governor's mansion in Huangnam County. Su Fengnian did not want to embarrass her. He took the initiative to ask, "How many years have you practiced the sword? Do you want me to teach you a few easy sword moves?" After Su Fengnian asked the question, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. The girl stared at him in a daze and muttered to herself. She seemed to be saying that His Royal Highness's eyes were better than someone else's, but she still only liked that guy. Su Fengnian coughed heavily. Song Huangmei sat down on the other side of the bench and hugged her shoulders with both hands to ward off the cold. She quickly regained her original straightforward personality and laughed, "Your Highness, I know you are an expert and a good person. I have someone I like. He is an outer disciple of a gang in Huangnam County. His name is Do Yangwan. His biggest wish in life is to wear a Beiliang saber and marry me. But my father does not seem to like him very much. How about Your Highness be merciful and casually give that Do Yangwan a saber? My father will definitely not object." Su Fengnian knew that this girl definitely did not know that Lotus Pond was almost completely wiped out from Lingzhou's Jianghu. However, the spy report did mention that a young man named Do Yangwan had escaped. He was the lover of Song Yan's daughter, Song Huangmei. Not only that, all 18 generations of Do Yangwan's ancestors had been thoroughly investigated. Su Fengnian had given instructions at the time for the Eagle Guard to give up on this person. An outer disciple who had just entered Lotus Pond for a few days could be killed or not. Since he had this relationship with the Song family, he could just treat it as a gift for Governor Song when he became a Lingzhou official. As for whether that young man would bear a grudge against Beiliang after escaping this disaster and whether he would be determined to take revenge for his sect, Su Fengnian did not care. In the entire Liang Jianghu, there were not many people like that young master who waved a folding fan who had the ability to kill his way to Su Fengnian's eyes. There were even more people who died without even seeing His Royal Highness once. If that person was able to rise above the rest and make Su Fengnian see his name in the spy report again, to the extent where Su Fengnian didn't even mind letting him know about Liantang Zhangsu's identity as a Northern Mang spy and then sending him to the border to sharpen himself. Since he wanted to touch a blade, after he entered the army, he would be able to touch it until he wanted to vomit. However, people's hearts were hard to predict. Only heaven knew which path this Do kid would choose to take. As for whether or not Do Yangwan and Song Huangmei could be married, that was even less of a concern to Su Fengnian. Even if he did not want to, he could not. In the current Beiliang, His Royal Highness's time was perhaps the most valuable. Su Fengnian collected his thoughts and smiled. Private individuals are not allowed to wear Bailiang knives. Besides, with your father's eyesight, how could he not see the authenticity of Do Yangwan's knife? Chapter 946. Song Huangmei had a happy-go-lucky personality. Hearing His Royal Highness say this, she only had an expression of understanding. She made an "oh" sound and did not insist. In reality, if it were a normal, slightly unscrupulous woman, if she had the chance to be alone with His Royal Highness, she would do everything in her power to make herself gorgeously dressed. If she caught His Royal Highness, she would rather kill the wrong person than let the wrong person go. Otherwise, she would use her identity as a woman to pester His Royal Highness for some promises. This was probably the reason why Su Fengnian was willing to casually chat with her. Song Huangmei did not disturb His Royal Highness, but she also did not leave. She sat on the bench and lazily leaned against the pillar, looking up at the starry sky. Su Fengnian was experienced and knew that this girl most likely missed the disciple of the Jianghu with the surname Do. He lay down again and closed his eyes to rest. In his mind, he carefully calculated the ending of Lingzhou. The officialdom of Lingzhou, which was originally far more complicated than Yuan Liang, was believed that with Su Beiji's ability, even if there were still some restrictions, he would be able to barely open up the situation. It was about time for him to leave. He could not always wear the official hat of Lingzhou's general and occupy this place. However, if he really wanted to leave, he had to first take care of that young ace who dared to intrude. Su Fengnian, who had closed his ears, sensed that after Song Huangmei stood up, she tiptoed away. He smiled gently and waited for her to walk far away. He snapped his fingers and said to the death soldier who had quietly appeared, "Tell Lingzhou's Yu Sun to do something and polish Do Yangwan. If this person is too unyielding, remove some of his edges and corners. If his will is already depressed, let him meet a noble person. Don't let him lose his spirit early." The death soldier was about to leave when he suddenly heard His Royal Highness ask with a smile, "How about I go and meet that peach blossom fan myself?" In the chaotic times of the spring and autumn period, many people fled far away to avoid disaster. In order to settle down, they did not hesitate to change their names. As a result, when the court set up a list of the names of the people under heaven, they knew that there were many new names that were unclear. However, there were not many people like His Royal Highness who did not even have a name. This man who seemed to have no past and no future, as always, did not say a single word. Su Fengnian waved his hand, and the death soldier disappeared in a flash. Su Fengnian, who still did not feel sleepy, strolled along the small path, counting the lanterns along the way. He guessed that after Li Shifeng stepped down, the court would agree to let Wang Lifting take over the position of Golden Thread Weaving Bureau. Because once this opening was opened, the Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, and the powerful King of Yanqi and the arrogant King of Guangling would probably be willing to borrow the east wind of Bailiang to pull out this thorn in the flesh. Thinking of this, Su Fengnian smiled and said, "What thorn in the flesh? It's more like a thorn in the flesh." Walking to the north side of the official residence near the lake, he was surprised to find that Song Yan, who had just become the king of Lingzhou, was sitting on a rock by the lake. It was a large object that had been moved from the lake of the spring deity to the Bailiang road. The cultured and famous people in Liang favored the huge rocks that were pulled out from the lake of the spring deity. Furthermore, even the most ordinary of rocks weighed a few thousand pounds. To be moved hundreds or thousands of li, even if it was not expensive, it would still be expensive. Song Yan's attitude was relaxed. One leg was straight, the other bent, and he drank mouthful after mouthful of Jian Nan Chun, which was said to be able to burn through the intestines and lungs. When Su Fengnian walked to the huge rock, Sir Song finally came back to his senses. When he wanted to stand up and greet him, His Royal Highness had already sat down cross-legged. It was not appropriate for him to stand up. Song Yan roughly understood the temperament of the Lingzhou general beside him. He did not bother to make a scene. He shook the yellow clay wine jar and only smiled and said, "Your Highness, it's bottomed out." Su Fingnian smiled and said, "What bottomed out?" "There are clearly 2 mouthfuls of wine left. If you can't bear to part with it, just say so." Song Yan was also honest. He laughed and said, "I really can't bear to part with it. This jar of wine has been buried underground for 7 or 8 years. At that time, 3 jars were placed underground. After Lord Li became the administrator, he drank 1 jar. This time, when he came to Lingzhou, he knew that he was going to be promoted and get rich. Plus, he had to leave Huangnan County, so he wanted to bring the remaining 2 jars here and give 1 to Your Highness despite the pain. Unexpectedly, when I went to the backyard to take a look, there was only the jar in my hand left. After thinking about it, I knew that my daughter, who sided with an outsider, stole it and gave it to someone else. This made me so worried that I had a few more strands of white hair. Your Highness, please don't blame me." Su Fingnian joked, "The reason has been taken by Sir Song. What else can I say?" Song Yan sighed with emotion, "Your Highness hasn't had it easy these past few years." Su Fingnian was silent for a moment. He waited for Song Bijia to raise his head and drink a big mouthful of wine before he laughed softly. "You might not believe it, but I went to Beimang to meet the king of the northern courtyard, Zhao Huainan. I also went to the capital to meet the emperor. There were many twists and turns in between these 2 trips. However, the one time I felt the most wronged was the first time I left home in a sorry state. In Hezhou, I met a son of a rich family who was carrying a Beiliang saber that he had bought privately. That fellow knocked a big bump on my head. If I was in Beiliang back then, this kind of trash would have been bitten to death by dogs. It was also at that time that I realized that there was a world of difference between having Su Xiao as a father and not having a father like him by my side. Later on, I also suffered some losses. However, it was probably because I was used to being treated like a rat on the street, so it was no longer difficult for me to get over it. At that time, I found some fugitives to be my training dummies. The horse bandit leader slashed my body with his saber. The pain was so excruciating that I almost rolled on the ground. At that time, I did not have the courage to lower my head to look at the wound. When I uncovered the scar, I told myself not to practice the saber anymore. Fortunately, I clenched my teeth and persevered. Since then, I have never been able to forget it. Even though my life has been hanging by a thread many times over the past few years, which was indeed a torment of hovering between life and death, I still feel that it is not as memorable as that stab. Song Yan was startled. He raised his hand and lifted the wine jar. He sighed and said, "This lowly official has never been afraid of the intrigues of the officialdom. However, if someone put a saber on his neck and really had to watch himself bleed, he would most likely not care about the integrity of a scholar." The phrase, "without the strength to truss a chicken," refers to scholars like Song Yan. Su Fingnian joked, "No man can be without the strength to truss a chicken. Some brothel girls are even better at trussing chickens." Song Yan spat out a mouthful of wine. He lowered his head and looked at his crotch. He laughed until tears came out. He did not care about wasting the last bottle of Jian Nanchunyan. After laughing, Song Yan turned his head to look at His Royal Highness. "Life is not as you wish. It is a bitter thing." Su Fingnian looked at the lake and smiled indifferently. "In the end, I can still talk with people. It is a fortunate thing." Song Yan was silent. Su Fingnian said, "Song Yan, go and bury 3 more jars of wine. In 7 or 8 years, if both of us are alive, you will give me a jar. I will also give you a border official who is not inferior to the administrator." Chapter 947. His Royal Highness, who had just stabilized his position as Lingzhou's general, left. The entire city was in an uproar. This made the provincial officials whose ranks were lower than Zhou Fulu stand outside the general's residence and look at each other. They were extremely vexed. These officials really had a stomach full of bitterness of not being able to find a temple to worship Bodhisattva. Fortunately, there was still a Lingzhou provincial governor and a guest temporarily living in the general's residence. It was a pity that the new provincial governor, Su Beiji, had put on airs in broad daylight and refused to see any guests. Only a few scattered officials who had waited bitterly until dusk refused to give up. They were told by the residence's head steward, Sun Fulu, that they could enter the residence for a chat. This made these people excited like they had been injected with chicken blood. They all felt that the ancient saying, "Where there is sincerity, metal and stone will open," was true. However, there was only one congratulatory gift in their hands. Once the master of the general's residence left, even though the provincial governor's rank was a full rank lower, he was a local snake. They really did not dare to slight him. Fortunately, the young provincial governor was understanding and waited outside the hall with the guest, Song Yen, for everyone, giving them enough face. The congratulatory gift was naturally given to His Royal Highness who had already left the provincial capital. That provincial governor Su was truly worthy of being His Royal Highness's most trusted aide. He joked that when he had a provincial governor's residence, he would ask for a gift from everyone and would not be lenient. Everyone looked at the calm and reserved Su Beiji and felt like they had eaten a large calming pill. As long as this person did not use His Royal Highness' power to start a massacre in Lingzhou and followed the rules to become an official, then everything would be fine. Right now, no one dared to cause trouble. Since everyone had accepted their fate and submitted to His Royal Highness, then they had a way out. They did not need to worry about being the first to be cut. They could go help the new master of Lingzhou pass firewood and make the flames burn a little higher. They saw that provincial governor Su and Song Biejia did not seem to be united on the surface but divided at heart. They spoke many times and seemed to have a tacit understanding. This made everyone feel fear. Even though they did not know what Administrator Li Gongda's plans were, as long as these two worked together for a period of time, even if they were newlyweds, they would still be separated. However, if Sir Li wanted to stir up trouble at this juncture, the general's residence would at least be able to put up a fight at the very least. They would not be completely helpless. As for the situation in Lingzhou, that was a matter for the future. The group of 5th, 6th, and 7th rank officials would just deal with it as they saw it. After sending off this group of guests, Song Yan raised his head to look at the sky. He smiled and said, "Provincial Governor, looking at the situation, it is going to snow again. Let's drink a little wine and wait for the snow together." Su Beiji shook his head and said with a smile, "I just handed over the matters in Lingzhou to the neighboring side. It is a mess and there is not enough manpower in the residence. I am someone who cannot sit still, so I will not drink wine and admire the snow with Sir Song. If there is really a day when we are free, we will make up for it together. At that time, Sir Song will not be able to escape even if you want to." Song Yen smiled and nodded. Looking at Provincial Governor Su Beiji's lonely back, he thought to himself, is Su Beiji going to be like Zhao Yiling in the Liang Temple, a lonely official who is favored by both civil and military officials? Su Fengnian left the capital of Lingzhou and had already arrived in Green Snake County. He did not travel in secret this time. Instead, he brought along 600 Lingzhou elites. The number of captains with real power in Lingzhou could be counted on one hand. For example, the Yu cavalry captain Dong Hongqiu was Zhong Hongwu's trusted aide, so it was not easy for him to move around. However, in such a large granary of Beiliang, it was impossible for Zhong Hongwu to cover the sky with one hand. The wooden man beside Su Fengnian was named Huang Xiaoguai. After his father died, he made an exception and inherited the position of captains with real power. It was a rare title, Pearl Captain. It originated from the war during the spring and autumn period. After Huang Xiaoguai's father broke through the city, he strung up thousands of heads with ropes and hung them all over the city walls like bloody pearl curtains. This was to welcome the enemy's reinforcements and to show the enemy that he was willing to fight to the death. Later on, he even performed meritorious service in defending the city. He was promised by Su Shao that no matter what rank he was, as long as he was an officer under the Su family's iron cavalry, his descendants would be able to inherit his meritorious service. As expected, Huang Xiaokuai successfully took over the position of Pearl Captain 2 years ago. However, he was always pushed aside and isolated in Lingzhou. He was the weakest of the captains with real power. After Su Fengnian chatted with Huang Xiaokuai for a while, he knew that there was a reason why Huang Xiaokuai was not popular in Lingzhou. Huang Xiaokuai was too stubborn and did not know how to adapt. Even when he saw him, a person who had resigned from the position of Lingzhou general and was still a member of His Royal Highness, Huang Xiaokuai was still the same. Compared to Wang Ji, who was also a descendant of meritorious service, the difference was like heaven and earth. However, Huang Xiaokuai did not know how to curry favor and only knew how to manage the army. This made Su Fengnian admire him from the bottom of his heart. In Lingzhou, he had seen many slippery and two-faced officials. When he saw Huang Xiaokuai, it was as if he had tasted table after table of greasy delicacies and suddenly brought a bowl of refreshing white porridge. The 600 cavalrymen galloped east on the relay road. During this time, there were constantly spies and scouts reporting back with military intelligence. Even Huang Xiaokuai, who was a rigid military officer who did not know how to climb up the ranks of the bureaucracy, was surprised. It turned out that not only were the 600 cavalrymen under his command rushing to the border between Green Snake County and Eastern Wind County to await orders, there were also a few troops from other counties who had heard the news. It seemed like they were going to spread a net to surround the master and servant pair. Using several thousand troops to deal with 2 people, wasn't His Highness a little too much? However, Huang Xiaokuai did not dare to comment on this. He originally thought that it would be difficult for His Highness to do anything alone in Lingzhou. Who would have thought that with one palm, the entire bureaucracy of Lingzhou was lying on the ground, not daring to even breathe loudly. Huang Xiaokuai, who had never had much talent in the bureaucracy, admired him even more. Behind Su Fengnian was the Lingzhou Deputy General Han Laozhan. In the cavalry, there was a carriage. Huyan Guanin had already been sent to the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang. Only Pei Nanwei, who was still wandering around, was left. From time to time, she would lift up the curtain and look at the person galloping forward. Pei Nanwei's eyes were gloomy. If this was 3 years ago, when the Crown Prince of Beiliang made such a big fuss in Lingzhou, in the eyes of the old foxes in the bureaucracy, it was like a child playing house. It was a childish act that would invite ridicule. But now, not many people dared to have such an arrogant attitude. Most of them secretly felt that this future king of Beiliang, even if he could not compare to Minister Qin, who would probably leave the capital in the future to become a vassal of Western Shu, the difference was not too far off. Chapter 948. Su Fengnian stopped his horse at the intersection between the north and south of the post road. Soon, an extremely majestic green horse appeared. This rider clearly came alone, but it still gave people the illusion that the horse's hooves were like thunder. In Huang Xiaokuai's field of vision, Su Fengnian gently squeezed the horse's belly and slowly moved forward. Huang Xiaokuai was speechless. The burly man with a spear in one hand did not wear an official's uniform or armor. It could be seen that His Royal Highness had an illustrious status. He also did not dismount from his horse. Huang Xiaokuai was impressed by the bearing of a martial arts grandmaster and a general on the battlefield. Su Fengnian calmly said, "Uncle Su, you've worked hard." Su Yanbing, who went to the border of Yuzhou to kill his way back and forth, smiled gently. Beimang's Hong Jingyan endured and did not make a move. Otherwise, it would have been delayed for a few more days. Su Fingnian turned his horse around and rode side by side with this great grandmaster of Beiliang who was capable of conquering the Jianghu after the old god of swords Li Chungang. He could not help but ask curiously, "Uncle Su, if you really want to fight with the world's top 10 Hongjingyan, what are your chances of winning?" Su Yanbing hesitated for a moment, then said indifferently, "Within 5 years, he'll die while I live. After all, I still have the advantage of a realm. It's hard to say what will happen in the future." That person is known as Beimang's little Tuoba along with the southern dynasty's Dongjua. He has extraordinary talent. When he approaches the realm of earth immortals, we can only perish together. Su Fingnian nodded. Dongjua's little Tuoba was referring to this fatty's military talent. After the death of the fifth raccoon, Hong Jingyan had seized the opportunity to take over the Ruan cavalry. After the world's greatest demon, the white-robed Luo Yang, left Beimang, he was already fully deserving of the title of the second strongest martial artist in Beimang. It was said that after Tuoba Chunsun entered the first rank, he was arrogant. The first person he provoked was this Ruan lord. He lost miserably, but the more he was defeated, the braver he became. With a public 3-year agreement, he announced that he, Tuoba Chunsun, would break through one realm every 3 years. For every breakthrough, he would fight with Hong Jingyan, causing the Beimang court to look at him in a different light. The Jianghu was just this cruel. Anyone could be reduced to a stepping stone for the next legendary figure. Other than the old monster Wang Xianji, who could compete with Lu Zhu 500 years ago, there was no one who was truly invincible. The beauty of the Jianghu was precisely this kind of cruelty and ruthlessness. It was just that if one wanted to become famous in one fell swoop, practicing the sword was comparatively more difficult. Putting aside the fact that Dong Tai was too immortal and there was no news of him, there were still many grandmasters of the way of the sword who overlooked the world's forest of swords. They were slightly better at practicing the blade. Only Gu Jiantang was a threshold that could not be bypassed. If one did not defeat them, it would be very difficult to claim that one's swordsmanship and blade techniques were the best in the world. The travel-worn Su Yanbing blended into the cavalry and asked in a low voice, "Your Highness, have you investigated the background of the master and servant pair of Ruliang?" Su Fingnian shook his head and smiled. "They are characters who came out of nowhere. We have never heard of them before. Not only did our Beiliang spies not know what to do, maybe Liang Zhaogo will also be accused of negligence. Actually, Liang Jianghu shouldn't have been so lonely these years. It was just that many grandmasters who had hopes of reaching first grade were killed by Han Diaoxi in secret. Some wandering immortals who pursued freedom, even if they reached first grade and stood aloof from worldly affairs, still couldn't escape from Han Diaoxi's bloody cat claws. Basically, every time they secretly left the capital under the emperor's orders, they would bring back 1 or 2 bloody heads. I really can't think of anyone who could escape the eyes of the imperial court and Zhaogo and suddenly appear as a first-grade expert. Not to mention those second-grade sects in the Jianghu, even Dragon Tiger Mountain, Wu family, and Sword Tomb aren't all first-grade experts. It is already hard to reach second-grade grandmaster, not to mention rare first-grade experts. Those who follow the rules won't be able to become top figures. Those who don't follow the rules have all died under Han Diaoxi's hands. Who knows who that fellow is? He really doesn't care about his life. Su Yanbing asked, "Do you need me to deal with that person?" Su Fingnian still shook his head. "There is no rush. If the Lingzhou Iron Cavalry are all embroidered pillows that can't withstand a single blow, then I'll let Uncle Su clean up the mess." Su Yanbing frowned. Since he is a first-grade expert, even if he is at the lowest Vajra realm, then even if he can't kill 700 to 800 cavalry in one breath, it won't be hard for him to escape. Unless that person lands on a vast plain where it is easy for cavalry to charge and is surrounded by many cavalry troops, and we don't give him a chance to rest, otherwise, it will be hard for him to escape. Back then when the Shishu Sword Emperor guarded the country gates, he had no choice but to die. That was why he was crushed to death by our Beiliang cavalry. If this person is at the Xian Finger realm, with one or two types of celestial phenomenon comprehension that Qi cultivators are proficient in, it will undoubtedly be harder to capture him. When the Beiliang army stepped into the Jianghu and dealt with the sects of the Jianghu, those who died were the Jianghu people who were unwilling to give up their roots and leave their homes. In order to deal with the fish that escaped the net, they could only use the Jianghu people to capture and kill them. In the words of the general, it was killing the Jianghu people with the Jianghu people. Your Highness mobilizing the troops like this, is it because you want to train the troops in Lingzhou? Su Fingnian nodded and said, since it's a game of cat and mouse, it doesn't matter if the mouse is too fat and the cat is too weak. In any case, there are many kittens that are being forced to work hard, and there are also many falcons that are hovering above our heads. There will always be a time when the mouse will slack off. This young master wants to close the door and slowly exhaust it to death. First, we will block it layer by layer, so that it can't move forward quickly. If it wants to kill, it has to be aware that it will be surrounded by a large number of soldiers. Lingzhou has mobilized a large number of scouts from the army to work with the old falcons and the new eagle guard. It is just to stop this first-grade mouse. If they can't even do this well, then so be it if they die. The senior commandant standing behind them will also be reprimanded by me. In this training, no matter if that pair of master and servant are numb to killing people, there will definitely be deaths. The Lingzhou officialdom did not kill anyone, and I am also holding back my anger. This is to prevent the soldiers of the Yu and Liang provinces from thinking that I only know how to talk and not use my blade. Su Yanbing smiled, Your Highness, it is best that you take away my Lingzhou deputy general position. Just hearing about Your Highness's complicated officialdom is giving me a headache. Su Fingnian smiled and asked, Uncle Su, can you tell me about the first grade 4 realms? Su Yanbing smiled, just talking is useless. Your Highness needs to be able to take a beating. Su Fingnian's eyes lit up, then I won't ride a horse and will run with Uncle Su to the border between Green Snake County and Dongfeng County. Su Yanbing did not express his opinion. The normal spear in his hand swept across. Su Fingnian, who had hurriedly reacted, slapped the spear with both hands. As a result, he was knocked off his horse and his body floated several dozen feet away. Su Yanbing leapt high into the air. At the same time, he raised his arm and threw out a spear. The spear was forceful as if it could split the heaven and earth. However, this martial artist was faster than the spear and arrived in front of His Highness, who was in a sorry state. He stepped on His Highness' left arm and His Highness slid down once again. Coincidentally, the tip of the spear was pointed at him. The Beiliang blade at his waist came out of its scabbard and blocked the might of the spear. Su Yanbing, who was holding the spear, shook his wrist and the spear blossomed. Su Fingnian was so miserable that he could only retreat again and again. It could be said that he was surrounded by danger. Huang Xiaokuai was so frightened that his face turned pale. He thought that this fellow was an assassin. Just as he was about to mobilize the troops to save His Royal Highness, Han Laozhan, who was sitting steadily on the horse, said calmly, It's fine. Give the order to continue forward. Chapter 949. The 600 riders had already passed through half of Green Snake County, but the Pearl Commandant, Huang Xiaokuai, still had not seen His Royal Highness. He was a bit impatient. If something happened to His Royal Highness, he was just a small commandant of Lingzhou. Even if he went to see the general, he would not be able to compensate for this crime. However, with Lingzhou's deputy general, Han Laozhan, comforting him, Huang Xiaokuai could only suppress his annoyance. After all, General Han had the special honor of being the general's personal retainer for more than a decade. He knew everything about the prince's manor in Mount Qingliang. This made Huang Xiaokuai feel a bit more at ease. Beiliang did not lack generals and warriors like Dong Yueqi, who had enjoyed glory and wealth for many years and lost their nature. However, there were also many honest people like Huang Xiaokuai who were deeply grateful and conscientious. The end of the Spring and Autumn War had only been a generation ago. This large manor in Beiliang had the Beimang barbarians eyeing it covetously from the north. Many people still remembered the bloody smell of war on themselves or their parents. Outside a wine shop, the wind and snow were howling. Large snowflakes rustled down like goose feathers. Two men, who were a generation younger than each other, sat opposite each other. They ordered 2 pots of extremely hard to drink but very good at warming their stomachs. They each drank slowly. There were very few customers in the wine shop. A long spear without tassels was placed on the table. This made the wine shop's shopkeeper's desire to ask for a sky-high price somewhat dwindle. The heroes of Jianghu who could openly carry weapons on the northern Liang path were not simple. The owner covered his hand and couldn't help but take a few more glances at the shabbily dressed young master. He didn't look like a poor person. Why would he go out in such a shabby outfit in the bitter cold? Was he not afraid of freezing to death on the streets? This unreasonable god was a pitiful person who couldn't make it through the winter and spring socializing every year. Su Fengnian, who had been beaten up miserably along the way, drank a mouthful of strong wine. His entire body felt relaxed. Su Yanbing slowly said, 100 rivers flow into the sea, 10,000 streams return to their origin. Practicing the sword, the blade, and the spear, in the end, is all about forging the body, spirit, and will. However, to put it nicely, it's a summary. To put it bluntly, it's just empty logic. However, he had no choice but to say it. When Su Yanbing left his sect to roam Jianghu, his senior apprentice brother Wang Xiu and Li Chungang of the Spring and Autumn Sword and Armor were at the peak of Jianghu. He heard a lot of praises. Among them, Huang Longshan, who had monopolized the Spring and Autumn Sword Armor, said, "It's laughable that people are short-sighted. They didn't know the sword qi." At first, when he heard it, he only thought it was some literary praise. Later, when he really stepped into the mysterious finger realm from Vidra, he realized that these words were not without purpose. No matter how complicated the moves were or how simple they were, they all had to retreat in front of the 2 words, divine will. The world's divine will was broken down into countless types. For example, there were many paths under our feet. Among them, the sword will path was the most eye-catching, because there were too many swordsmen walking on this path. It created the scene of mountains rising one after another, like an endless dragon vein. Previously, when Su Yanbing mentioned the sword will to His Highness, he did not simply want His Highness to abandon the saber and practice the sword. It was because of the solid foundation of the old god of swords 2-sleeved green snake and the sword tomb that nurtured the flying sword. Even if the realm fell, it would only fall in the internal energy. It would not hinder the spirit from rising from the ground. Especially when His Highness had comprehended it while playing the zither at the Peach Cheeks Pavilion. The cat-man Han Xingxian was able to kill the celestial phenomenon with the mysterious finger. Among the masters in the world, he was second only to Dong Tai. This was why he was called the invincible below the land immortals. The battle of life and death for us martial artists is not a debate between famous scholars. We will only do it by hook or by crook. The owner of the Western Sichuan cottage, who was killed by His Highness, was an example. He could be regarded as a land immortal if he was an armchair strategist. However, in front of the real top martial artists who had been tempered in blood, he was not worth mentioning. He was like a paper tiger that would be smashed with a poke. It was said that a poor family could not produce a noble son, and a gentle village could not produce a first-class master. These people walked the Jianghu. Even if they had a high starting point and were very fancy, they did not understand and disdained those unorthodox methods that did not conform to the rules. When facing a master of the same realm, they would only be humiliated. If not, how could they, who were born with famous teachers and secret manuals, not be at the top of the Jianghu? His Highness made Su Yanbing feel very gratified. It was because of the trip to Beimang. He put himself on the line of certain death and slowly cultivated the realm. He stumbled along the way, but once he got it, it was the real thing. His Highness was not like the younger generation of many famous families in the Jianghu. They had countless secret manuals in their hands, but none of them were written by their own painstaking efforts. If one followed the footsteps of others for a lifetime, how could one become a talent? Back then, Su Yanbing left the sect for two reasons. Firstly, I was a disciple with a different surname, so I didn't want to compete with my senior brother Wang Xiu for anything. Secondly, I didn't want to be a frog at the bottom of a well. I wanted to see the local customs and customs of the Jianghu with my own eyes, as well as the various immortals who had come out into the world. All these years, when I was drinking and chatting with my senior brother Han Laozhan, he also said that he entered the Jianghu too late, which was why he was stuck at the Finger Xian realm for so many years. Perhaps he would never be able to ascend to heavenly phenomenon in this lifetime. Back then, among the 4 direct disciples of my master, the one with the highest talent wasn't me, nor was it Wang Xiu. It was Wu Jinling, who had never appeared in the Jianghu before. He entered the grade at the age of 9, second grade at the age of 12, and Vajra at the age of 17. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It's quite a pity. Otherwise, Beiliang would have one more great grandmaster who reached the peak." Chapter 950. Su Yanbing, who was rarely sentimental, sighed, in Jianghu, every time a stone is thrown, there will be ripples on the lake or huge waves on the river. There will definitely be people who will drown in it. Who knows when it will be my turn? If Wu Jinling is like Zhao Ningxian of the Taoist master's residence in Longhu Mountain, he will be at a higher level than me, Su Yanbing. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Some people are fine as bystanders in Jianghu, but they are not naturally suited to mingle in Jianghu. This is like those top scholars in the imperial court. In fact, not many of them can make it to the second rank. They will be disbanded after a few years. They are far inferior to those ordinary jinshi." Su Yanbing nodded and said, "It's hard not to believe in fate. Especially after entering the celestial state, only then do I know that the illusory concept of fate is not a preposterous word used by the ancestors to scare people." Su Fengnian drank the wine in the bowl in one gulp and said in a low voice, "Previously when I was playing the zither, I was enlightened. After thinking about it, I only understood the word come and go." Su Yanbing was very interested. He put down the bowl and asked with a smile, "Your Highness, what do you mean?" Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and looked out of the window at the fierce wind and snow. His eyes drifted and he said leisurely, "I once fought with Wang Xinji by chance. It was not a satisfying fight. Old Wang only used 70 to 80% of his strength at the last moment. After that, I was alone in the wilderness. I don't know if it was because I was in an out-of-body state or because I was possessed by the devil. Anyway, the first thing I did was to disperse mountains, rivers, and many things in the world in my mind. That kind of feeling was wonderful. It was as if the world was in my hands, but I could throw it away at will. It was as if the world was the king of the world. Then, without any external objects, I was bored to death. I took back those things one by one. But in this process, I was just a spectator at the beginning. I didn't catch anything. It wasn't until I was playing zither in the Peach Cheeks restaurant that I remembered the injustice of playing zither. In addition, I saw Song Nianqing's 14th sword. I vaguely felt that the Earth Immortal sword was crying out for someone. Back then, I did a lot of ridiculous things like squandering money. Now, I was just picking them up one by one. But I didn't want to cry out for injustice. Instead, it was because I was in an out-of-body state. The last place before I collected my thoughts was above the clouds of the ninth heaven. In a trance, I seemed to see a flood dragon surging, moving clouds and summoning rain. There were also many immortals sitting in various positions. No matter how the clouds moved, they always held fishing rods in their hands. They didn't have hooks, but they sat high above the heads of all living creatures. They swung their fishing rods again and again, fishing up strands of the world's fate. Especially above the Bailiang, the number of times they raised their fishing rods was especially frequent. I was clearly familiar with the back of the Immortal who was singing loudly, but I just couldn't remember who it was. I couldn't cry out for injustice. What should I do? So, I really want to know if there's really someone above us. Is there a way to try slaying a dragon and killing an Immortal? Only then can I vent my anger. Even Su Yanbing, whose cultivation realm was unfathomable, was dumbfounded when he heard such crazy words that were loud enough to blot out the sky. Su Fengnian suddenly stood up and looked to the east. The spring and autumn sword that was hovering outside the East Sea Martial Emperor City finally moved. To the east of Dongfeng County was Gui County. An elegant young master wearing a black robe rode slowly on a horse. A long saber with a white scabbard rested on his shoulder. His hands lazily rested on the sword, which rose and fell with the horse. A folding fan was inserted into the jade belt on his waist. He looked relaxed. Beside him was a retainer who didn't ride a horse. His figure was strong and healthy, and he was running wildly behind the man and the horse. The handsome young master suddenly stopped his horse and turned to look to the east. The strong retainer asked carefully, "Young master, that Bailiang's son can't hold back anymore?" The young master's slender and fair fingers gently tapped the scabbard, as if gently comforting the famous saber in the scabbard. He smiled charmingly and said, "Not yet. But that person from Suacia Valley's sword has eaten its fill. He's preparing to fight Wang Xianji with a sword." The retainer grinned and said, "Young master, if His Royal Highness really kills Mount Bubang's leader Fifth Raccoon, he won't be easy to deal with. You have to be careful." The young master rolled his eyes like a woman's coquettish eyes. "Slap him." The retainer, who reminded him out of kindness, immediately kept quiet out of fear. He slapped his face hard, and scarlet blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Only then did the satisfied young master continue to urge his horse forward. He muttered to himself, "Everyone says that the previous leader of Wudong, Hong Shixiang, is the reincarnation of the devil-slaying platform's Qi Xianjing. As for me, I can barely be considered relatives with those uncles and aunts who were killed by the great spiritual master Qi Xianjing. Even if their seniority is the same as mine, their age is still there. I don't know why Hong Shixiang killed himself. Since that person surnamed Su has a deep relationship with Wudong Mountain, if I don't find trouble with him, who else can I find trouble with? Wait until this young master takes care of Su Fengnian and stays in Bailiang for a year or two. Then, I'll be able to take control of Zhulu Mountain. It's not a good feeling to have a woman of unknown origin ride on top of my head. This young master has never had the hobby of women on top of men. I'll let her fight with Mount Huishan Xinyuan Qingfeng first. If it doesn't work out, I'll personally go to Zhulu Mountain and clean up the sect. Although I'm still not that woman's match in a one-on-one fight, I'll bring a few thousand cavalry and 100 inner court experts. Even that Wang Xianji, I'll be able to cause trouble for him. This demonic sect, oh. Sooner or later, it'll be this young master's rightful possession." The retainer snickered. "Young master, you'll be able to sit firmly on the dragon throne." The young master loosened his grip on the scabbard, and the scabbard spun out a large circle. With him and his horse as the center, the snowflakes within 100 feet radius were crushed into pieces. The retainer clearly heard the young master on the horse sneer. "Yu Zhang, you're a Vajra realm expert after all. You even managed to escape from the hands of a human cat. Can't you have some backbone? It's very embarrassing to bring a lousy piece of trash like you out." The retainer smiled obsequiously. It's already a great honor to run errands and do odd jobs by young master's side. The young master curled his lips into a smile. "It seems that the 80% mature thunder of mind I learned from Gu Jiantang has broken your backbone." The retainer nodded vigorously in agreement. The young master looked up at the snowy sky with a helpless expression. Jianghu is boring. Chapter 951. Huang Xiaokuai's 600 riders were about to enter the eastern Wind County, but they still did not see His Highness the Crown Prince's figure. Even though Lingzhou's Deputy General Han Laozhan was still calm and composed, this Pearl Commandant also secretly sent a trusted scout back to Lingzhou's capital to report the military situation. Huang Xiaokuai did not know if Dong Yueqi and the other commandants were the same. In any case, he had an old turtle in the city that kept in secret contact with him all year round. Every year, they would, coincidentally, bump into each other a few times. Han Laozhan, who was watching from the shadows, retracted his gaze. Seeing the elite scout leave, he admired Huang Xiaokuai a little more. Han Laozhan's martial cultivation was far from his junior brother Su Yanbing, who was not very famous. However, Han Laozhan knew that he had no hope of reaching the top of Jianghu, so he placed most of his ambition on the battlefields at the border. Over these years, he had been influenced by the great general and had a unique understanding of the situation in Beiliang. The geographical advantage of Beiliang had always been widely criticized. However, in Han Laozhan's eyes, Beiliang's land was narrow and barren, and the people's livelihood was not great. However, this disadvantage was not necessarily a bad thing. There was a saying in the countryside that exhausted one's strength. Beiliang made enemies on all sides, and this unknowingly created the bravery and fierceness of the people. Compared to the rich Jiangnan, the people who grew up in the barren mountains and turbulent rivers were all valiant and did not fear death. If this was not the case, how could there be such a rich source of soldiers at the border of Beiliang? No matter how valiant and good at fighting soldiers were, if they were thrown into a safe place where they did not have to worry about food and clothing, and their morale would be worn down for 10 to 20 years, they would not be considered valiant soldiers. This was an important reason why the Guangling Prince Xiao Yi was not as good as the Yanqi Prince Xiao Bing. Guangling Circuit was located under the armpit of the imperial court, while Yanqi Circuit was like the right foot of the imperial court. They had to travel every day and interact with the barbarians of Nanjiang. Han Laozhan knew that he only needed to wait until His Highness left Lingzhou before he would become a general with real power in one of Beiliang's 3 prefectures, Yuliang and Lingling. He would be a third-rank official in the Liang dynasty and share military and political power with the provincial governor, Su Beiji. Moreover, as a general, he was only a person who managed the Beiliang's backyard. However, when that traitorous martial nephew, Chen Jibao, left the capital and went to the western Shu Dao, it would be a fight that would not be inferior to the bloody massacre at the border. As for Chen Jibao, who had betrayed his sect, as his martial uncle, Han Laozhan did not hold a grudge against him. There were rules in Jianghu, and senior martial brother Wang Xiu's death was not as aggrieved and wronged as the outside world thought. Thinking of this, Han Laozhan could not help but laugh. If his junior martial brother, Wu Jinling, who had unfortunately died in the Vidra realm, their sect would successively produce spear immortal Wang Xiu, Su Yanbing, who was even better than eldest martial brother, Han Laozhan, who had reached the mysterious finger realm, Wu Jinling, and the new Confucian sage Chen Jibao. In the future, there might even be Blue Bird, who had taken over the handbrake spear, who would also ascend to the first rank. In just 2 generations and 2 generations, they had produced 6 first-rank experts. This was even grander than the formation of 2 top scorers and 1 family's 3 second places. In Liang and Beimang, only the Wu family's sword tomb and the chess and sword music school could stand shoulder to shoulder in Jianghu. Han Laozhan wondered if he should ask His Highness to raise the banner of the Wang family. Perhaps this would attract many Jianghu experts to join Beiliang and join the Wang family. In the future, the Beiliang army might have a Wang faction of the Wang family spear. The 600 cavalrymen stopped briefly in Dongfeng County. They did not enter the city, but stayed where they were to rest and reorganize. Huang Xiaokuai only ordered a dozen or so elite cavalrymen to escort the carriage. He found a first-class restaurant so that the woman would be more comfortable. Huang Xiaokuai did not work in the bureaucracy. It was not that he did not understand, but he did not want to be in the same company as his colleagues who were not worthy of their Bailiang armor. Since this woman had a deep relationship with His Highness, and they were not in a hurry, he was happy to go with the flow. It was just that the road to happiness was strewn with setbacks. When Huang Xiaokuai saw the silhouette of a horse carriage at the city gates, other than the Pearl Cavalry under his command, who were dressed in casual clothes, there was also a large group of local knights who had somehow hooked up with them. Unable to escape the vulgar path of a profligate young master, there was also a large group of Jianghu disciples swarming over. Huang Xiaokuai fiercely spat on the back of his horse. These bastards actually dared to rob His Highness. Those Pearl cavalrymen also had good eyesight. When they saw the carriage heading towards Huang Xiaokuai's side, they immediately reined in their horses and hurriedly ordered their accomplices not to act rashly. However, a few of the cavalrymen were too busy trying to steal wives for the young masters in the city to stop their horses in time. When the simple carriage was less than 20 paces away from Huang Xiaokuai and his men, they finally realized that the situation was not good. They were about to turn their horses around. Huang Xiaokuai, who was sitting high up on his horse, had a ruthless look in his eyes. He shook his head. Next to him, an archer with outstanding strength and the Pearl cavalryman expressionlessly took out an arrow from his quiver and shot it. With a pang, the arrow pierced through the air, piercing through the skull and nailing into the snow. The pile of pale white snow on the side of the road was instantly dyed red by the fresh blood. The other two Jianghu cavalrymen wished that their mounts did not have an extra pair of hooves, but they were still shot to death one by one. Without exception, an arrow pierced through their heads, killing them on the spot. In the northern Liang region, who would dare to compete with a General Seed who had military merits and was arrogant and domineering? Huang Xiaokuai expressionlessly squeezed his horse's belly. The date-red horse under him trotted forward. He took out the Bailiang saber from his waist and used the scabbard to point at a young master wearing a fur coat at the front. That fellow's face was gloomy and uncertain. Finally, he gathered his courage and slowly urged his horse forward. He was about to introduce himself and his father's surname General to prevent this foreign military officer wearing a military officer's armor from overthrowing the Dragon King Temple. Huang Xiaokuai already said in a neither cold nor warm tone, Lingzhou's general has already ordered the 6 counties of Lingzhou to not allow more than 5 cavalrymen to ride on the streets. Violators will be sent to the torture chamber for the first time and be whipped 50 times. Repeat offenders will be punished regardless of their family background. That young master did not think much of it, but in front of him, 3 people had died on the spot. He also saw that behind this military officer were strong and there were cavalrymen in succession. It did not seem like a normal army. He could only obediently smile and say, "General, this is my first offense today. I will go to the yamen to surrender myself. I hope the general will not be angry." Huang Xiaokuai paused and asked, "You're called Gu Rund. Who is Dongfeng County's Shiwu General Gu Yuncher to you?" The young master was delighted and quickly said, "He is my father." "I wonder who the general is." Huang Xiaokuai smiled eerily and put away the Bailiang saber from his waist. He raised his arm and waved it. While the young master was stunned, another arrow swept through the wind and snow. Just as he thought that he had died in front of his house for no reason, his vision blurred. His body trembled and he swallowed with difficulty. He saw an unfamiliar young man standing next to the ruthless military officer. In his hand was the arrow that should have taken his life. The Pearl military officer, Huang Xiaokuai, quickly dismounted from his horse. Not only him, but all the other Pearl cavalrymen also dismounted and stood at the same time. They stood like javelins stuck in the snow, respectful and reverent, their eyes blazing. Huang Xiaokuai did not call out His Royal Highness' identity. He only saw that the dumb goose had the guts to sit on his horse and not move. He was about to draw his saber and kill him personally. The young master, whose tattered clothes were not as luxurious as Gu Run's, shook his head and threw the arrow back high. It just so happened that it was thrown to the archer. He smiled warmly at the young master of the Gu family, who had finally regained his senses and had rolled off his horse to kneel on the ground. I've heard that you, Gu Rund, once had a dispute with a group of rich young masters from Yenzhou. You taught them a lesson. After that, you said that no matter who they were, if they dared to behave atrociously in our Beiliang, you would teach them a lesson. It's a pity that your father had to privately compensate a Yenzhou general for this matter. Young Master Gu, I wonder if you still have this kind of backbone these past 2 years. Gu Rund raised his head. His mind spun rapidly as he tried to guess the identity of this person. At the same time, he tried to find a way out of the situation. Yes, yes. This is all learning from His Highness the Crown Prince. His Highness said that only hedonistic sons who dare to point their spears at men from other places can be said to have reached the Grand Master level in the competitive business of hedonism. This time, it was Gu Rund who was reckless and wanted to puff himself up at his own cost. He wanted to protect that Lady Yongrong on her journey, and he definitely didn't want to do the despicable business of snatching people away. He only wanted to let the lady in the carriage leave safely. Gu Rund had been observing the situation the whole time. When he saw that person nod with a smile, he finally felt relieved. He heard that person's mellow voice say with a smile, "Let's forget about today. Go back to the city and tell your friends that riding horses in the city is only allowed to run as fast as a normal person. If more than 5 horses disturb the people on the streets, don't even talk about bumping into people. As long as they are caught, they will be punished according to the new rules. If there is a yamen that dares to cover for them, they will be stripped of their official position and sent to the border guard station. That's right, Gu Rund, remember to tell your father, Gu Yunshi, that I used to steal his wine pouch when I was young. If this General Wu still holds a grudge, he can go to Liangzhou and ask for it from me. As for you, Gu Rund, if you have the heart to stop harming the little rich young masters in the village, you can join the army. I will help you plead with this Pearl Commandant beside me to open the back door for you." Chapter 952. The previous chapter had more than 5,000 words, so this chapter is a bit late. The man and woman generally lived together peacefully. They passed through Dongfeng County and approached Zhigui County. Su Fingnian and Pei Nanwei rode side by side on a deep plank road. Another 100 li to the east was Tongmen Pass, which was known as a natural barrier. There was a saying that Tongmen Pass was solid, but Beiliang was solid. It was fully deserving of being the most important pass in Zhigui County. It was heavily guarded, and the captain of Tongmen Pass, Xian Inma, had 6,000 elite soldiers. He was undoubtedly a trusted general that the king of Beiliang valued the most. This time, Su Fingnian moved the troops from all over Lingzhou out of their encampments, but not a single soldier was moved from Tongmen Pass. It was enough to show the extraordinary position of Tongmen Pass in Lingzhou. Su Fingnian did not let Huang Xiaokuai's 600 cavalry follow. Instead, he took a detour to Tongmen Pass to rest and reorganize. He only brought Pei Nanwei and Su Yanbing on this secret plank road that only the military horses could step on. In the past, there were some officials and generals who came here to compete in horsepower. Now that there was an order, they did not want to run into the tip of the spear before the Lingzhou general left. The reason why Pei Nanwei wanted to get out of the carriage to take a breath of fresh air was because she came from a family of scholars. She had heard that the previous dynasty's poet-emperor used a poem from Tongmen to win the title of the frontier fortress poem of the previous dynasties. That was how Zhigui County came to be. It was said that there was a cliff carving of a sword hero left on the mountain wall in front of them. Her heart yearned to see it. Su Fingnian's hands did not pull on the reins. He closed his eyes and focused, allowing the warhorse to run forward. Pei Nanwei's equestrian skills were average, but she was not afraid of falling off the horse and getting injured. She took off her veiled hat and put on a sable fur coat. She rode a handsome black horse. In the white snow, it was hard to say whether she was like an agile butterfly or a peony swaying in the wind and snow. When Pei Nanwei stopped the horse and raised her head to look at the blurry stone carvings on the cliff, it seemed that there was nothing special about it. She came in high spirits but returned in disappointment. Especially when Su Fengnian mentioned this plank road to her. Just in the previous dynasty, there were more than 20,000 corpses in this area. This made Pei Nanwei's hair stand on end. She no longer had the least bit of leisure and elegance. It was almost dusk. Above her head was the heavy snow that did not want to stop. The plank road was dead silent and gloomy. She was obviously a little scared. She had no choice but to find something to talk about. She slowed down the horse and asked the man beside her why the Bailiang spies could not find out the details of the master and servant pair. Su Fengnian reached out his hand and accumulated a palm full of snowflakes. He held out a small round snowball and said carelessly, "A good spy is even rarer and more valuable than those brave and skillful military officers. Not only must they be able to endure the loneliness year after year, they must withstand conspiracy after conspiracy. The key is that they must always be loyal and devoted. They must also be able to take charge of an area and filter out all kinds of information. In the end, they have to risk their lives to deliver it back. Therefore, without 5 or 6 years of polishing, it is impossible to produce a qualified spy that can be used with confidence. Some old spies either disappear at will or directly betray the enemy camp. The difficulty of espionage lies in the fact that it is already difficult for spies to do things. It is even more important to test a person's tenacity. Not everyone is willing to do this job. In the past, in Chu Lushan's hands, there were more than 30 provinces in Bailiang. For more than 20 years, there were only about 400 people trained. What's more, half of them needed to be cast long lines to catch big fish. If they were divided among more than 30 provinces and more than 200 counties, how many people could each county have? In addition, last year, in order to help those scholars pass away smoothly, many precious spies who had been hiding for many years were lost. Besides, our Bailiang spared no effort to eradicate the spies on both sides of Liang and Beimang. Zhao Go and Spiderweb also didn't rest for a single day. Every year, many people died between the three sides. It was fortunate that Chu Lushan was in charge of espionage. If it were anyone else, Bailiang would have long been blinded. Just those 300,000 cavalry, which is very frightening, won't be able to win a big battle. In the War of the Southern Dynasty, the Bailiang cavalry advanced all the way. A large part of the military merit had to be credited to the Bailiang spies. Last time when I went to Huangnam County, I only cared about killing people to vent my anger. I killed a few double-faced spies. After that, my sister scolded me for being a wastrel who didn't know the cost of daily necessities. Indeed, I wasn't wronged. Su Fengnian gently tossed the snowball into the distance. He said softly, "This world is really too big. It's not easy to find one person." Pei Nanwei shot a glance at him. She couldn't see His Royal Highness' expression clearly. She only felt that there was a faint sense of desolation that was rarely seen. The wind and snow whistled. They were still dozens of li away from Tongmen Pass. Normally, the journey wouldn't be long, but at this moment, the snow on the plank road was thick and the horses' hooves were sinking. Even though Pei Nanwei was wearing a warm marten fur coat, she began to feel that the suffering was not light. Moreover, in the eyes of an expert, her equestrian skills were really shoddy. Su Fengnian looked at the sky. There were signs that it was getting heavier. The three of them were riding against the wind, but Pei Nanwei insisted on riding alone in the wind and snow. Su Fengnian looked on coldly from the side. When her horse suddenly slipped, her hands were already cold and numb. She didn't have the strength to hold the reins tightly. Just like that, she fell onto the plank road and rolled. Fortunately, the snow was soft and there was no injury. Su Fengnian reined in his horse and turned around. He stretched out a hand. She was stubborn. After standing up, she turned around and reached into the collar of her marten fur coat. She used her body temperature to warm her hands. She gritted her teeth and continued to ride forward. Su Fengnian was too lazy to ridicule her. He urged his horse to speed up and blocked in front of her horse to block the biting cold wind. When they finally saw the towering walls and flickering lights of Tongmen Pass, Pei Nanwei, who had endured to the end, finally fainted and fell off the horse. Su Fengnian then carried her onto the horse and quickly rode into the city. Chapter 953. His Highness the Heir of Tongmen personally led the way and led His Highness the Heir into that simple official residence that did not have the slightest bit of extravagance. When Pei Nanwei woke up with a splitting headache, she discovered that she was lying in a room as warm as spring. Aside from the fact that her snow-soaked fur coat had been taken off, her clothes were in perfect condition. Only then did Princess Consort Jingan, who looked as if she had just made a trip to the gates of hell, slightly recovered her soul. Turning her head, she saw that a stove had been set up in the room. The man whose back was facing the bed was currently boiling wine. The aroma of the wine wafted through the air. Pei Nanwei, whose stomach was rumbling with hunger, rested her strength and put on a pair of brand new warm boots. She sat next to him and reached out to warm herself. Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and pointed at the carved mahogany food box on the stool, indicating that she was well-fed and well-clothed. However, he very kindly poured her a cup of scalding rice wine. Pei Nanwei opened the lid of the food box and did not pay attention to any decorum. She buried her head in the food and wolfed down the food. After drinking that cup of wine, she ordered another 2 cups. Very quickly, she began to feel a strong sense of fatigue. Perhaps because she was worried about him, she endured the urge to fight back and did not go to bed to sleep. In reality, the two of them were well aware that they were making a bet. They were betting on who would be the first to surrender. Before that, they would mind their own business. There was no need for her to deliberately put on a chaste and virtuous attitude. Pei Nanwei raised her eyelids and looked at him from the corner of her eyes. His face was illuminated by the light of the charcoal fire. He took off his outer coat, revealing the dark green soft armor that even a layman like Pei Nanwei could see was priceless. She bit her lips to wake herself up a bit. Her voice was hoarse as she asked, "Why do you want to practice the blade?" Su Fengnian was slightly distracted. He then shook his head and said in a flat voice, "I told you for fun. If I told you that I wanted to be a hero who would help others when I saw injustice, you would definitely not believe me. If I say it's to save my life, you're going to say that I don't know how lucky I am and that I'm pretending to be sick." Pei Nanwei poured herself a cup of wine, but she did not drink it all in one gulp like before. Instead, she placed the warm wine cup against her cheek and said with a smile, "Regarding your original intention of practicing the blade, I believe in the former more." She finally had the mood to chat, but Su Fengnian's mood was bleak. He said indifferently, "We still have to hurry on with the journey tomorrow morning. You sleep. Don't worry, I'll go out when I'm done." Pei Nanwei frowned her naturally charming brows, but still went to lie down on the bed. She held on to the corner of the blanket with both hands. She didn't hear any movement for a long time, so she turned around and looked at the back of the figure in the room. Not long after, he used a pair of tongs to stir up some ash and covered it with the charcoal so that it would burn slower. Then, he got up and quietly left the room. Su Fengnian came to the top of the wall of Tongmen Pass. Su Yanbing and Wei Shaking were standing far away. They were sensible enough not to disturb him. The snow continued to fall for an entire night. At the first glimmer of dawn, the green hills turned white. A rider and a servant entered Jigui County without any obstructions. Ever since they entered the borders of Beiliang and intimidated a few squads of government troops that were as insignificant as ants, it was as if they had entered a no-man's land. The retainer with the strength of the Vajra realm couldn't help but ask, "Young master, is this Bailiang heir so scared that he's hiding? Does he really think that everything will be fine just because he's hanging a no war sign?" The handsome young master who was gently patting his palm with a folding fan was enjoying the snowy scenery along the way. He mocked, "Yu Zhang, oh Yu Zhang. You really think with your butt. Back then, Han Diaoxi didn't kill you. Was it because he thought you'd dirty his hands?" The robust retainer chuckled softly and didn't dare to talk back. The young master opened and closed the peach blossom beauty folding fan in his hand. He smiled and said, "His Royal Highness won't be so cowardly as to avoid the sharp edge. However, this young master really doesn't put him in my eyes. I still want to experience White Bear Yuan Suozong's left-handed saber. Everyone only knows that Yuan Baixiong is the world champion in horse combat, but they don't know that he had once sparred with Gu Jiantang. After that, he switched to using his left hand to practice his saber, thinking of getting back at our General Gu someday. However, it's not easy for this young master to meet Yuan Baixiong, the commander of the cavalry. No matter how useless the Bailiang cavalry in Lingzhou is, they still can't be underestimated. Let's see how big of a welcoming party Su Fengnian can put up. Yu Zhang, if it's just a small fight with a few hundred cavalry, I'll leave it to you. Remember, it's okay to break an arm or a leg, but don't kill anyone." The Vajra realm's servant twisted his neck, and it cracked like a string of soybeans. He nodded and smiled sinisterly. If His Royal Highness is stingy and uses 300 to 400 cavalry to fool you, no matter how thick the formation is, it won't be able to withstand a few attacks from me. The young master didn't wear a saber on his waist. Instead, he used a long vermilion rope to tie the famous saber. The other end of the rope was tied to his wrist, and he just hung it on the side of the horse's belly, swaying. Yu Zhang glanced at the saber, and there was some fear in his eyes. This thing was a heavy weapon that was on par with the world's #1 talisman saber, South Flower. He didn't know which senior came up with the name, but he didn't care at all. It was simply called Crossing the River. Yu Zhang was a famous figure in the Devil sect. 60 years ago, a few sky devils went to the devil-slaying platform to challenge the great immortal of Mount Longhu, Qi Xianzhu. In the end, not only did they fail to divide the world, but they were also slaughtered. Since then, Zhilu Mountain has been in decline. Yu Zhang, as an outer mountain disciple of the Devil sect, could barely be considered a first-class master. Especially after reaching the first rank, Yu Zhang became complacent. He refused the recruitment of the last remaining Duke of Mount Zhulu, and did not enter the mountain to be conferred the title of Marquis. Instead, he led a group of people to revolt, calling himself the leader of the Devil sect. He set off a bloody storm in the martial arts world, but before he could make a name for himself in Jianghu, he was stopped by a big eunuch in a bright red robe. This human cat came alone, and except for him, everyone else was skinned and had their tendons pulled out. If Han Diaoxi hadn't spared his life to find out the secret location of Mount Zhulu, he would have died a long time ago. However, after Mount Zhulu no longer invited him to enter the mountain, Yu Zhang was like a rat on the street. He was always on tenterhooks, afraid that this human cat would treat him like a piece of trash and kill him. When news of Han Diaoxi's death came from the capital last year, he cried tears of joy. He was wondering if he could make a comeback in Jianghu, but in the end, he was beaten up by this young master who claimed to be from Mount Zhulu. He was even able to use General Gu's Thunder Heart Square, and many secret techniques of the Wu family's sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool. His own skills were all seen by this young man once, and he was able to use them for his own use. So what if Yu Zhang was a first-rank master? How could he not be shocked? Yu Zhang had to admit that there were indeed martial arts geniuses that were hard to come by in 100 years. In the past, it was Wang Xianji, Li Chungang, and the other seniors of the Jianghu. In the future, it would most likely be the young owner of the Crossing the River saber. The young man raised his head and saw a peregrine falcon fly by. He smiled charmingly and said to himself, "It's a bit slow." Chapter 954. Peregrine falcons constantly flew above the master and servant. Yu Zhang was only a boorish man and was not familiar with military formations. He did not know what these 7 or 8 military falcons meant, but he could clearly feel the cold aura of dark clouds pressing down on the city. Yu Zhang squatted down and pressed one hand on the ground of the post road. He wanted to report the situation of the enemy to the young master with the folding fan. There were 200 riders charging toward them, but Yu Zhang quickly remembered that the young master's realm was much higher than his, and the Xian finger had the mysterious power of divination, so he did not want to flatter him. Yu Zhang picked up a snowball and weighed it in his hand, wondering if he should smash an eyesore falcon to death. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a particularly bold scout. The other scouts in all directions all stopped their horses at a distance. Yu Zhang stood up with a grim smile and swung his arm. Remembering the soldier's order, the snowball shot out and hit the warhorse's head. It suddenly exploded into a cloud of scarlet blood, and the warhorse died instantly. The scout rolled on the ground. Instead of running away in panic, he quickly took out his short crossbow and ran toward the man who killed the horse. After a dozen steps, he finally remembered the military order and turned around to retreat resentfully. On the way to his beloved warhorse, the young scout's eyes turned red. He took off the Nanmo horse tag tied to the horse's neck and put it into his pocket before running away. The young master with the folding fan did not pay attention to Yu Zhang's small quarrel. His line of sight followed the mountain ridge and looked at a mountain peak that was not too tall in the distance. According to his original plan, they would be intercepted by a group of cavalry stationed in Zhigui County. There would be at least 300 to 400, and at most 600 to 700. He would let Yu Zhang warm up and crush the courage of this Bailiang cavalry. After penetrating the formation, he would use his speed to charge straight into Tongmen Pass. Then, he would personally engage in a fierce battle with the elite cavalry of Tongmen Pass. No matter who won or lost, he would become famous overnight. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not show his life-saving talisman. Of course, he was not arrogant enough to think that he could suppress the 6,000 cavalry of Tongmen Pass alone. Most likely, he would only fight and retreat at the same time. If he really did not retreat, he would end up like the Sword Emperor of Shishu. The Wu family's 9 swords breaking 10,000 cavalry, and Li Chuangong's 1 sword killing 2,600 cavalry on the Guangling River a few years ago, did not have good endings. When this young master who broke the border alone raised his head to look at the mountain peak, there were also people who were looking into the distance. By Su Fingnian's side, other than Pei Nanwei, Su Yanbing and Han Laozhan, the 2 deputy generals of Lingzhou, there were also the 2 military officers of Tongmen Pass, Wei Shaking and Xian Yinma, as well as the military officer of Pearl, Huang Xiaokuai. The 2 generals Wei and Xian were different from Huang Xiaokuai. This time they did not bring a single soldier with them. Pearl's 600 light cavalry were all waiting at the foot of the mountain. The 200 cavalry that Yu Zhang sent were Zhigui County's military officer Ma Jinchai's men and horses. This time Su Fingnian used his status as Lingzhou's general to issue an order to have Dongfeng Zhigui and several other counties' soldiers and horses to leave their respective bases. As for the several counties' yamen and soldiers moving out in full force, it was nominally under the new Lingzhou provincial governor Su Beiji. With the mountain peak as the center, all the small and large post roads within a radius of 30 li were tightly sealed. Merchants had to take a detour. Close to 100 scouts were scattered all over the place. Regardless of direction, they strived to have a scout every 3 li. Ma Jinchai's frozen field cavalry was divided into 3 groups, gradually forming a formation. The 200 cavalry took the lead to spy on the situation. Other than that, there was also the Dongfeng Northern Country captain, Ren Chunyun, who brought 400 soldiers and horses. They were waiting for orders in the southwest. Fengshou captain Zhu Boyu personally led 500 cavalry in the northwest, eyeing covetously. The troops of the various government offices, military offices, and torture chambers weaved through the gaps in the northwest. The ranks of captains in Beiliang were very messy, and there was a huge disparity in the number of soldiers they could command. For example, Tongmen Pass's Wei Shaking and Xian Yinma each led 3,000 men, but their ranks were still one rank lower than Pearl Captain Huang Xiaokuai, who was also a rank 4. Frozen Field Captain Ma Jinchai, Northern Country Captain Ren Chenyun, and Fengqiu Captain Zhu Boyu were of the same rank as Wei Xian and Fengqiu Captain. However, all the soldiers under their command added together could not compare to a single captain in Tongmen Pass. The military officials of Northern Liang were strong and powerful, suppressing the civil officials to the point that they could not raise their heads. However, they themselves also had many factions, with mountains in great numbers. Other than the long-standing disputes at the border, there were also disputes over the passes and counties, and within the counties and counties, there were disputes over who was truly lacking in merit officers. Being caught in it was like falling into a spider's web. The slightest movement would affect the entire body, causing a shock and rebound. When Su Fingnian was trying to clean up the officialdom in Lingzhou, he was not looked upon favorably because of this. Han Lao's Han raised a jujube wood spear named Xiao Man's shoulder and laughed softly. This person definitely did not expect your highness to be so bold, directly mobilizing 4 captains and close to 3,000 cavalry to crush him in Zhigui County. You did not give him a chance to go to Tongmen Pass, much less enter Lingzhou to steal his reputation. Su Fingnian laughed. If he can use the methods of the Jianghu people and take the head of a general in the midst of tens of thousands of soldiers, do you think the court will bestow him the title of general? Tongmen Pass's Wei Shaking sneered. Based on this kid's ability, he can't even go up the mountain. I heard that this fellow is very tender and has the appearance of a beautiful woman. Brother Xian, you have a variety of tastes. When your highness has tied him up, why don't you ask your highness to bring him back to Tongmen Pass to be a concubine? Tongmen Pass's Captain Xian Yinma, who had a feminine appearance, was mocked by Old Wei. He did not retort and said softly, I do have such an idea, but how would I dare to act on my own and ruin your highness's plan? Old Wei, since you're interested in drinking horses, why don't you give me your little son, and we'll become in-laws. In the future, I'll call you father-in-law. It doesn't matter if I'm 1 generation younger than you. Chapter 955. Wei Shaking, who had been checkmated, was so angry that he kicked Lieutenant Xian's horse in the stomach and cursed. He and Xian Yinma came from different mountains in the Beiliang army. Wei Shaking was a general who was close to the general, while Xian Yinma had moved through various armies. He had held a military position under Zhong Hongwu, Chen Jibao, and other old Beiliang giants. Later on, he was involved with the infantry commander Yan Wenluan. Now, Xian Yinma could be considered half a member of the Yan family. However, he had gotten along well with Wei Shaking in Tongmen Pass these years. Inside the pass, they had schemed and plotted against each other. It was true that they had to support the 3,000 soldiers under each of them who were crying piteously for officials, money, and military equipment. They could not tolerate their noble character and unquestionable integrity, but they had always maintained unity with the outside world. Everyone knew that Lieutenant Xian liked men. He did not care much about the matter of accumulating wealth and family property. If an old commander wanted to show filial piety to Xian Yinma, he would spend a lot of money to buy a well-trained young master from Jiangnan and send him to the Xian manor. This was more useful than anything else. Fortunately, the king of Beiliang had never been a harsh and merciless master. He had never made a fuss about these dirty things that did not affect Beiliang's military and politics. Xian Yinma glanced at the young man who had already left his post as Lingzhou's general. After hearing the conversation between him and Wei Shaking, he turned a deaf ear. His smiling face was still the same. He looked down at the courier road at the foot of the mountain and slowly said, It's starting. Xian Yinma focused and straightened his back to look into the distance. Ma Jinchai's 200 riders had already charged toward the master and servant pair. Xan Yinma had always looked down on Lieutenant Dong Yi and Ma Jinchai's soldiers. In his opinion, the 3 legs of these soldiers were all weak. It was said that circling around to block the retreat path should have been Lieutenant Zhu Boyu's military mission. Ma Jinchai had shamelessly begged His Highness for this good job of achieving military merit. Furthermore, she did not care about the established military order to keep a distance from the master and servant. Instead, she initiated the charge on her own. It was clear that she believed the pair of Jianghu ruffians were easy to bully. As long as she captured the 2, she would not be afraid of His Highness's punishment afterwards. As for whether or not she would become enemies with Huang Xiaokuai, who was isolated in Lingzhou, Ma Jinchai, who had a marriage relationship with Commander Yan's relative, would not care. Fan. The young master fanned himself and closed his eyes to rest. Behind him, he could hear the sound of horse hooves. There was no such thing as the rumor of 100 Bailiang cavalry being able to shake the heavens. He had already experienced General Gu Jintang's skill in managing an army when he was at the eastern border of Ji province. He had once been pursued by 600 Gu Jintang's cavalry across a vast plain for a long time. That was the true definition of a powerful army. If the Bailiang cavalry was only at the level of 200 cavalry behind him, then the Bailiang cavalry would be a huge joke. Even such a force of 2,000 could be defeated by the 600 Gu Jiantang cavalry. Without needing his master's signal, Lu Zhang turned around to face the 200 embroidered pillows. Taking a deep breath, the tip of his foot rubbed against the cold and hard ground of the relay station, instantly creating a pit. His figure floated out of the pit, the short crossbow sprinkling a black rain that didn't hurt or itch. In the eyes of an expert, it was somewhat comical. Although Lu Zhang looked aggressive, he was actually still 60 to 70 zhang away. Ma Jinchai, who was at the bottom of the 200 cavalry, didn't feel anything wrong. There were more than a dozen brightly armored cavalry escorting her. Among them, there was actually a charming and petite retainer wearing a gorgeous light armor. She was clearly a woman with a graceful figure. It turned out that in addition to snatching the credit, Ma Jinchai also wanted to show off his commanding skills in front of the doting beauty. However, Ma Jinchai's expression changed drastically. She saw that the 200 riders were only focused on charging forward, but that Jianghu man's speed was far faster than a warhorse's. The second wave of crossbows splashed down on his head, but it could not be said that they missed. It was just that the man did not even bother to reach out his hand to block the crossbow bolts, allowing them to hit his body. Like a reed pole hitting iron or stone, the crossbow bolts broke off and slid down. He did not give the riders a chance to continue playing. He had already come face to face with the 3 riders in the lead. The 3 riders were shocked and immediately threw away their crossbows. They hurriedly raised their spears and rushed into the gap between 2 galloping riders. Yu Zhang jumped high, his body flattened, punched his horse, and kicked it. The rider on the left that was closest to the outside was also affected. The 2 warhorses were stacked on top of each other and were thrown out of the relay station. The warhorse on the right was even smashed 50 to 60 zhang away by the man's fist. It crashed to the ground with a loud bang, causing snow to fly everywhere like willow catkins. Yu Zhang's expression changed drastically. 2 warhorses were stacked on top of each other and were thrown out of the relay station. The warhorse on the right was even smashed 50 to 60 zhang away by the man's fist. Following that, the 3 riders were clearly terrified and wanted to avoid the man's unstoppable momentum. However, they did not have time to do so. One of the riders was quite skilled in horsemanship. In desperation, a violent temperament emerged and he directly urged his horse to crash into the boorish man of Jianghu. Ma Chaowei had already announced that whoever could kill this bandit would be rewarded with 600 taels of silver and a promotion of 3 ranks. Lu Zhang jumped lightly and raised his elbow to smash the horse's head. A tall horse that was charging forward was actually knocked down by the elbow. The rider who was charging forward also took the opportunity to stab the intrepid Lu Zhang in the chest with his spear. However, before he could be pleasantly surprised, he felt a piercing pain from the web between his thumb and index finger. The spear slipped out of his hand. Lu Zhang grabbed the spear with one hand and grabbed the rider's collar with the other, throwing him high into the air like he was grabbing a chick. Then, he flicked his wrist and raised the spear. His figure retreated backwards and caught up with the two riders who had luckily brushed past him. He then placed the spear horizontally and blocked their path. The two warhorses collided with the spear and were actually unable to move forward. The few rows of riders behind them pushed their spears against each other. The charging formation from before was instantly disrupted. Lu Zhang infused internal energy into the spear with both hands and laughed as he stepped forward. The dozen or so riders in front of him clustered together and were thrown off their horses. Lu Zhang did not care about these weak ants. He switched from holding the spear horizontally with both hands to holding it with one hand. A few clever riders on horseback threw their spears. One of the spears was aimed at Lu Zhang's head. The man who was as docile as a domesticated cat and dog in front of the young master with the fan slammed his head forward and directly shattered the spear. He snatched the spear from his hand and swept it diagonally upwards, hitting the rider's waist. The rider's body bent and flew horizontally, rolling into a slightly playful snowball on the snowy ground. Lu Zhang leaped forward. He did not care about spear techniques and only used the spear in his hand as a staff. With a swing of the staff, he sliced a warhorse from its back to its feet and split it in half. The rider sat on the half of the warhorse's corpse on the ground with a dull look in his eyes. Ma Jinchai swallowed her saliva and forced herself to calm down. She did not look at her beloved concubine's pale face and muttered to herself, "This bastard is fierce. We can slowly retreat and then kill him with a sudden thrust." Then, Colonel Ma Jinchai turned her horse around and ran away like a wisp of smoke. On the mountaintop, Su Fingnian turned his head and smiled at Wei Shaking and Xian Ma. "It seems like our Colonel Ma has welcomed a good start to the new year." Then, he looked at the sneering Colonel Pearl and said in a flat tone, "Wang Shaokai, Ma Jinchai did not want to compete with you for military merits. She clearly put in a lot of effort to show weakness to the enemy and lure them in." The corner of Huang Xiaocai's mouth rose. He said softly, "Colonel Ma's favor, Huang Shaokai appreciates it." "Your Highness." Su Fingnian nodded. Huang Shaokai rode down the mountain alone. The 300 cavalrymen at the foot of the mountain did not move. The other 300 cavalrymen formed the left, right, middle, and middle troops and rushed toward the young master who was slowly waving the peach blossom fan. Yu Zhang looked back and sneered. He did not chase after the defeated frozen field cavalry. When they first charged at him, they were impatient like a hungry man who saw a woman. Now, before he could even warm up, they were already crying for their parents to go home. Yu Zhang threw away the red tasseled spear that was soaked in the blood of the warhorse. He planned to experience the ability of the next cavalry in Bailiang's Lingzhou. In the eyes of this Vajra realm expert, the so-called Bailiang cavalry were all made of tofu. Yu Zhang spat a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground. Yu Zhang could be the king of Bailiang and play around with such small fries. On the mountaintop, Su Fingnian, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, had his hands in his sleeves. Two of his fingers were twirling inside his sleeves as if he was spinning silk from a cocoon. Chapter 956. On the post-house route, the battle with the frozen field cavalry as the main characters had come to an end. Very quickly, there were scouts who passed on the general military information to the Commandant of the Northwest, Ren Chunyun, and the Commandant of the Northwest, Zhu Boyu. The reactions of the two generals were completely different. Dressed in bright red armor, Ren Chunyun stood with a saber at her side. When she heard that Ma Jinchai had suffered a setback, she laughed loudly and stroked her horse's mane with a gloating expression. As generals of the same province, their ranks were similar. Since the official hats on their heads were not too different, then naturally they were enemies. Ren Chunyun, who came from a poor background, had long disliked the laughably named Commandant Ma. Her subordinates were all descendants of Lingzhou's generals, so how could they train elite soldiers? There were 2 plains on the Lingzhou plains that were easy for cavalry to stretch out and train. Last year, Ren Chunyun had a dispute with Ma Jinchai and fiercely taught the flashy frozen field cavalry a lesson. However, Ma Jinchai quickly turned the tables on Ren Chunyun and the officialdom. The salary was not bad, and no one dared to do anything to this lightning pool. Ren Chunyun only received some leftovers that did not even have B-grade aptitude. Only after asking around did she find out that it was Ma Jinchai's in-law who was an important member of Beiliang's military depot who had set up a stumbling block. Later on, Ma Jinchai brought 100 cavalry with brand new armor to Ren Chunyun's territory to flaunt her might under the pretext of killing roaming bandits. If it were not for Ren Chunyun firmly suppressing the lower generals to not cause trouble, there would have been a mutiny. On the other side, Zhu Boyu was much calmer. His impression of Ma Jinchai had always been bad, but he never showed it on his face. If he really met her, he would drink and be polite. Therefore, the Windcoat cavalry got along quite well with Ma Jinchai and the other young masters. The main reason was that Zhu Boyu was also a military official who had come out of a general's manor. His father's generation had fought side by side, and there was a life and death relationship as a foundation. However, although Zhu Boyu had never been to the battlefield at the border and his achievements were rather thin, he was one of the few Beiliang youths who could calm down and manage the army. These years, he held real power and was often mocked by many surplus generals who had returned to Lingzhou with military achievements. This made Zhu Boyu more willing to get along with Ma Jinchai and the others. After all, the fake friendship and toasting was better than those old seniors who did not have any descendants who would show off their seniority the moment they met. Right now, Zhu Boyu was worried that His Royal Highness, who had not started a killing spree in the Lingzhou officialdom, would use this chance to make an example out of Ma Jinchai and drag him down. Why would His Royal Highness care if a Windcoat cavalry without any military achievements was clean and honest or was in cahoots with Ma Jinchai? Zhu Boyu, who had the misfortune of being born with a baby face, sat high on the back of a horse. His warhorse was only AB grade. The Windcoat cavalry only had 30 A-grade warhorses, and they were all given to those who had military achievements and elite soldiers. Zhu Boyu waved his hand and let the scout, who did not need to report based on the rules of the Windcoat cavalry, return to investigate. Zhu Boyu, who was wearing normal armor, let out a breath of air. His expression was abnormally serious because he could see that His Royal Highness had a bodhisattva heart for the Lingzhou officialdom. However, there was a difference between the military and politics. With the example of Huaihua Great General Zhong Hongwu as an example, Zhu Boyu was certain that the troops in Lingzhou would not be so lucky. The peach blossom beauty fan was gently fanned and a gentle breeze blew across his face. The hair on his temples fluttered lightly. The handsome young master in a black fur coat looked over at the same level. The 3 cavalry units that surrounded them in a fan-shaped battle formation were like clouds and mud compared to the previous 200 cavalry units. The hooves of the horses were in sync and there was no confusion at all. With his outstanding eyesight, he could clearly see the young faces of the cavalry. Their eyes were firm as if they had received instructions and did not have any intention of using the light crossbows. Beiliang had very strict restrictions on crossbows. If one carried a Beiliang knife, they could rely on their family background to get away with it. However, if one dared to carry a crossbow, even if it was an inch-long crossbow, which was a weak light crossbow that a maiden could use, once discovered, their family would be confiscated on the same day. There was no room for negotiation. The movement sprinted wildly on the post road. The straight line under his feet splattered mud in all directions. It was frightening. The Vitra realm martial artist, who was tired of being a lackey, only wanted to do whatever he could to his heart's content. In his eyes, the 200 cavalrymen who could not withstand a single blow from him were frail little girls who needed to be supported. The 200 to 300 cavalrymen in front of him were nothing more than slightly stronger and sturdier women who could not withstand a few blows from him. The first pin expert, whose personality did not match his name, laughed loudly as he charged forward. 3 iron spears pierced toward him at the same time. Lu Zhang grabbed 2 cold spears with both hands and twisted them into 2 lumps of iron. He pulled his wrists inward and then knocked them outward. The 2 cavalrymen who refused to let go were knocked off their horses by him. The spear in the middle was aimed at Lu Zhang's chest, but it did not pierce through. Instead, the burly man with a smile on his face continued to charge forward. The spear that pierced downwards curved in an exaggerated arc in the air. It was obvious that this cavalryman's strength and tenacity were not comparable to Ma Jinchai's troops. As an outstanding martial artist who could occupy a place among the small group of people at the top of Jianghu, Lu Zhang did not care if the ant under his feet bit him lightly or heavily. He bent his knees and crawled under the belly of a horse. He lifted a galloping warhorse with one shoulder. Like an overlord carrying a cauldron, Lu Zhang threw the warhorse to the back of the cavalryman. The few cavalrymen who were caught in the crossfire fell to the ground and could not get up. However, they were quickly pulled up by the cavalrymen who had bypassed the dead warhorses. 2 of their comrades rode on the same horse and fiercely thrust their spears at Lu Zhang, who was completely invulnerable. Lu Zhang, who was finally somewhat interested, laughed wildly. He suddenly rose from the ground and stepped on a cavalryman's head. Then, he took advantage of the situation and moved left and right, stepping on the cavalrymen and warhorses one by one. In an instant, more than a dozen cavalrymen had completely lost their ability to fight. Lu Zhang seemed to be still not satisfied. After landing on the ground, he was too lazy to attack. He only focused on charging forward. Wherever he went, the warhorses' bones were broken and they died after violent collisions. Chapter 957. The cavalry formation was quickly penetrated by Yu Zhang, but Yu Zhang did not stay idle. The cavalry on the left saw the situation and did not charge recklessly under the command of their leader. Instead, they continued to lead the cavalry and threw their spears one after another. Most of the spears that pierced Yu Zhang's body either slipped or fell on the road, while some that did not pierce Yu Zhang were nailed into the frozen ground. Yu Zhang wanted to tease Beiliang and let them see his Vajra physique, so he stood still. After the spear flourished, the cavalry on the right followed up with a rain of arrows. Yu Zhang's body was completely unharmed except for his tattered clothes. Although Yu Zhang seemed to be careless, he was in fact silently accumulating strength, trying to climb to the peak in one go before the battle. It was not that he could not continue to tease a group of rats, but it was better to be safe than sorry. If there was a martial arts master hidden in the cavalry and he attacked when Yu Zhang's chi was weakened, although he would not be defeated, if he lost even a little bit of face, who knew if the vicious young master behind him would vent his anger on him when he was bored? Serving this young master was more tiring than serving his ancestors. His heart was filled with hatred. If he could have a higher realm than that handsome young man, Lu Zhang, who had always scoffed at famous scholars, would not mind changing his taste. But Yu Zhang knew very well that this kind of ruthless revenge, which made him feel comfortable, was not something he could count on in this life. Unless that person was suddenly beaten to the ground by an immortal, then he would have the chance to kick him when he was down. However, the northern Liang path had already produced the old god of swords Li Chungang, and Chen Jibao had already defected to the capital. Only the junior brother of the spear immortal Wang Xiao and Yuan Zuozong, who was the commander of the border cavalry, were left. Could these 2 top masters still join hands and appear here? Although the 100-man cavalry on the courier road had been pierced through, they quickly resumed their charge. At the foot of the mountain, 100-man cavalry under Huang Xiaokuai's personal command had also joined the battle. The 100-man cavalry on the left and right sides of the mountain switched between crossbows and javelins. Even though they were unable to achieve anything against a Vidra realm expert, their formation was tight and their performance was far better than Ma Jinchai's frozen field cavalry. The fearless Yu Zhang let out a long breath, the fog lingering around him. He stretched out his arms and twisted his wrist joints. As if he was annoyed by the noise of the horse's hooves, he stomped on the ground, the dull rumbling sound faintly covering the sound of the hooves. Yu Zhang stomped on the road, the momentum gradually growing, rumbling like thunder. The horses on the road rose and fell more violently, but still, no one was afraid of the battle. The political strife in northern Liang, especially the strife in the military, had always been disdained by the pillars of the imperial court of Liang as a farce in the countryside. If they could not gain the upper hand in the argument, they would roll up their sleeves and start a brawl. Compared to the imperial court and the capital, where the imperial court's imperial edicts had been passed down for generations, how could northern Liang, which had been built in just 20 years, catch the eye of the imperial court's big shots? However, it seemed that many of the pillars of the imperial court had forgotten that the Liang imperial court had the cultural heritage of the Beiliang cavalry. The impoverished Beiliang also had the unique heritage of the Beiliang cavalry. Dong Yueqi was not a good cavalry, but people like Wang Ji, Ren Chenyun, Zhu Boyu, Wang Xiaokuai, and so on, who were not even qualified to be seen by the pillars of the imperial court, were all doing well. Yu Zhang wanted to break a few spines of Beiliang with his own hands. Of course, he did not know about the heritage of the torch and was too lazy to think too much about it. However, the cavalry in front of him was different from the others. He felt very uncomfortable. It was not easy for him to become a level 1 expert, but in the end, he had to work like a cow or a horse for a junior. Now that he was in Beiliang, he had to vent his anger. Yu Zhang stared at the cavalry general who was wearing colorful armor and had unsheathed his cold saber. Yu Zhang's vigorous qi filled his entire body. He felt like he could take a sword from an immortal. Yu Zhang's spirit was at its peak. His wild laughter echoed throughout the post house as he collided with the cavalry general. When they were 50 steps apart, he leaped up high, stretched out his long arms, and punched down. The Beiliang commandant, Wang Xiaokuai, who was leading the charge, blocked with his saber horizontally. The Beiliang commandant's saber suddenly sank, and the warhorse's hooves were instantly crushed by the unstoppable force of thousands of pounds. The edge of the Beiliang commandant's saber only managed to squeeze out a trace of blood from the man's fist. Wang Xiaokuai held his saber in one hand and the back of his saber in the other, but he was still powerless to stop this Jianghu villain's punch. He swallowed a mouthful of blood and abandoned his horse to move to the side. His saber brushed past the man's fist, but it was still unable to cut the man's skin. The commandant's commandant beside him pierced his spear at the same time, accurately aiming for Yu Zhang's left eyeball, forcing him to stop chasing after their commandant. Another commandant threw his spear at Yu Zhang's crotch. This was the first time Yu Zhang frowned. The essence of killing a Vidra realm expert was nothing more than the 4 words, "The truth will come to light." Only after exhausting the qi that flowed endlessly like water and losing the perfect and flawless invincible Vidra would half the battle be won. If an expert was given enough time to take a breather, slowly replenish the qi and restore the qi in his body, he would have to start all over again. However, the accumulation of an expert's qi was always easier to disperse than to gather. The qi could travel for hundreds of miles in an instant. This legendary realm of Earth immortals was something that even the Vidra realm and Finger Xian realm experts could only dream of. For example, Yu Zhang's qi had fallen to 80% after 2 consecutive attacks. He allowed the rain of arrows and spears to rain down on him without moving an inch, and only managed to recover to 90% using a clumsy method. The reason why the Jianghu people regarded the death of the Sword Emperor of Shishu as a tragic death was not purely because they felt pity for the expert who was crushed into a pile of minced meat. It was more because this Grandmaster swordsman, for the sake of his worthless family name, guarded the gates of the imperial city of Shishu all by himself. The enemy he faced was a tide of locust cavalry, and he had no chance to catch his breath at all. He could only rely on his last breath to fight to the death. It was as if he was watching himself walk step by step on the road to the underworld. However, Yu Zhang merely furrowed his brows. He was only facing 100 riders. He casually pushed aside the blinding spear of the commandant, and with a tap of his toes, he stepped on the iron spear thrown by the rider and used the momentum to knee the commandant in the head. Yu Zhang stood on the back of the warhorse. The warhorse continued to gallop forward. Yu Zhang stood proudly on the top of the mountain, and for some reason, he felt a tightness in his chest. A rider was slowly descending the mountain. Faster and faster. Far behind Yu Zhang, the peach blossom fan was closed with a snap. The vermilion rope with the other end of the white scabbard on the young man's wrist was suddenly pulled taut. As the rider descended the mountain, the young man in black sensed that he was being watched by someone on the mountain. He muttered to himself, "Is there such a hidden expert in Beiliang? Why hasn't Zhao Guo's records mentioned him before?" Yu Zhang's scalp went numb, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. He was scared out of his wits. The sleeves of the rider fluttered in the wind. From the cuffs of his sleeves to his arms, there were countless red threads coiling around them, as if they were scarlet snakes crawling all over them. In the past, there had been such a red snake cat riding towards Yu Zhang leisurely. Yu Zhang, who had been hit in the ribs, seemed to have gone mad. With a pained expression, he squatted on the back of the horse and hooked his fingers into his scalp. Then, he raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. He clenched his teeth and slapped the warhorse to death. Then, he rushed towards the rider. The Pearl cavalry at the foot of the mountain and on the road stopped their horses subconsciously, leaving the rider and the unstoppable unknown Jianghu martial artist to fight. The rider floated down from his horse and continued to move forward. The pair, who had been expected to fight fiercely for a few hours, brushed past each other just like that. His sleeves turned even redder. It turned out that he was holding a bloody human skin that had been peeled from head to toe. The 300 riders on the road widened their eyes in unison as they watched His Highness, who was carrying a fresh bag of skin, pass by. He stopped in front of the young man who was no longer waving his fan and casually tossed the human skin into the air. Huang Xiaokuai would never forget this scene for the rest of his life. His Royal Highness, who had an ordinary Beiliang saber on his waist, was up against the crossing the river that was not inferior to the Nanhua saber. Chapter 958. The two captains of Tongmen Pass looked at each other in dismay. Wei Shaking and Xian Ima's horizons were much higher than normal soldiers. They were even more shocked by His Royal Highness's method of killing people. The reason why it was called a magnificent feat was because there were usually military experts like Wei Xian hidden among the cavalry. The rule of Jianghu to measure the level of martial arts by the number of armor pieces was actually not accurate. After all, iron armor was a dead object, while the person wearing the armor was a living person with martial arts skills. They also had their own circulation of qi. Wei Shaking glanced at Lingzhou's Deputy General Su Yanbing from the corner of his eyes. This retainer of the King of Beiliang, who was carrying an iron spear without tassels, had urged his horse to take a few steps forward. He looked at the post house in the distance. There were a few strands of light purple flowing light moving around the tip of his spear. On the other hand, the other deputy general, Han Laozhan, who was always beside them, seemed to be somewhat surprised. He shook the reins of his horse and urged his horse to come to the side of his fellow disciple, Su Yanbing. He asked softly, "What's going on?" Han Laozhan, the mysterious finger, saw clearly what happened on the post house. However, this spear Immortal Wang Xiu's junior martial brother was curious as to how His Royal Highness did it. The Jianghu man with the physique of the first stage Vajra realm charged directly at His Royal Highness. In the end, His Royal Highness took a punch head-on. His Royal Highness took the opportunity to let the scarlet snake crawl onto the man's body. Like snow melting into the surface of the blazing fire in the furnace. The reason why the Vajra realm was called the unbreakable Vajra realm was because the chi in the body and the physique were tempered. The two merged together seamlessly. His Royal Highness's sleeves were densely covered with scarlet snake-shaped red ropes. In an instant, they blocked the acupoints of the first-stage martial artist's body. In addition, the man did not care about anything else. Not only did he hope to use brute force to break free from the scarlet snake, he also wanted to crush the scarlet snake in one go. The chi in his body, which could be said to be at its peak, was like adding firewood to the furnace. Due to the chi acupoints being blocked, the toughness of the red ropes was far beyond imagination. As a result, the furnace was on the verge of collapse, unable to withstand the boiling water. When the martial artist was on the verge of death and still failed to kill the enemy who was close to him, he finally realized that his chi and physique had been forcibly separated. Finally, he regained some clarity. However, by the time he came to his senses, it was already too late to stop. Before the martial artist died, he indeed had some courage that made Han Laozhan take notice of him. He risked his life and finally smashed out with both fists, one on his Royal Highness's chest and the other on his middle dantian. Even Han Laozhan admitted that he could not be as steady as his Royal Highness. It could be said that the overly conceited martial artist had killed himself. However, his Royal Highness's red ropes and the two supernatural powers that made the fists disappear like clay oxen in the sea were the real key. From an outsider's point of view, the first-stage martial artist did not seem to be a match for his Royal Highness. However, Han Laozhan was well aware of the treacherous nature of the situation. Su Yanbing had been staring at the young master fanning himself the entire time. He said calmly, "Laozhan, you don't know this. When Li Chungang taught His Royal Highness the two-sleeve green snake, it was not an armchair strategist. Instead, he actually smashed hundreds of two-sleeve green snakes into His Royal Highness's body, giving His Royal Highness the opportunity to comprehend the essence of the path of the sword on his own. His Royal Highness once told me that at that time, other than learning the sword, he also wanted to polish the great yellow cord that the Wudang sect leader had instilled in him. Using His Royal Highness's words, using the two-sleeve green snake to beat himself was not some stone from another mountain to polish jade, but to use the jade of another mountain to polish the stone was somewhat of a reckless waste of natural resources. Later, His Royal Highness had the only remaining great yellow cord golden lotus seedling pulled out by the celestial phenomenon expert Lu Haoshi. However, Lu Haoshi had indeed pulled out the seedling's tendons and lotus leaves, but the pond where the purple gold lotus was cultivated and nurtured was still there. Most importantly, the roots were still there. His Royal Highness said that with his internal energy alone, no matter how hard he cultivated, he would not be able to make the decaying roots grow again. It was only after he had lost the great yellow cord that he learned of the old sect leader Wang Zhongluo's gift. The great yellow cord cultivation that was close to the celestial phenomenon level of internal energy was secondary. The unremarkable pond was the most precious. It was like a lotus pond. The scene of the lotus spreading across the surface of the water was very beautiful. However, without the pond, there would be no way to talk about the scene of the lotus growing out of the mud without being tainted. Therefore, on this trip, he once again used the stupid method of using a stone from another mountain to polish jade. He used the shady business of using an external force to stir up the muddy water in the pond. For this reason, His Royal Highness suffered quite a few beatings along the way. I don't know how His Royal Highness found out that the boorish man of the pugilistic world had a grudge with Han Diaoxi, so he purposely used the human cat's trick to provoke him into attacking with all his might. The fiercer the attacks of a first-grade martial artist, the more beneficial it is for His Royal Highness. As for why His Royal Highness is so proficient in skinning the human cat, I don't know either. Han Laozhan lamented, although it is beneficial to one's cultivation, every punch is on the flesh. Moreover, it is the final struggle of a Vajra realm expert. It is not easy to hit him. Su Yanbing smiled and said, to His Royal Highness, he is already used to it and calls it a common occurrence. Moreover, no matter how painful it is still better than the two-sleeved green snake that the old god of swords, Li Chungang, casually threw out back then. Wei Shaking moved closer and asked cautiously, General Su, is the pugilistic world expert who died in the hands of His Royal Highness really a first-grade expert? Su Yanbing nodded and said with a calm expression, how many experts have died in the hands of His Royal Highness? Wei Shaking secretly swallowed his saliva and didn't dare to say another word. Han Laozhan asked, then His Royal Highness is going to have another battle with that self-proclaimed romantic young man? Su Yanbing shook his head and said slowly, among the 4 realms of the first grade, only the Vajra realm is suitable for tempering one's physique. Any higher and it is very likely that the gains will not make up for the losses. That young man is already at the Finger Mystery realm. Laozhan, you are also at the Finger Mystery realm. You should know that the Finger Mystery realm of a pugilistic martial artist is vastly different from the first-grade Finger Mystery realm of a Taoist Jinren. In terms of the degree of fierceness in killing people, the same realm is like a capital official and a local high-ranking official of the same rank. The actual authority in the hands of the latter far surpasses the former. How can a 4th-grade official of a low-ranking government office in the capital have more authority to kill than the governor of a local county? Among the 4 realms, the Finger Mystery realm is neither high nor low, but it has the most number of secret techniques. Unless it is an earthly immortal or a celestial phenomenon realm expert, no one would dare to say that they can win against an unfamiliar Finger Mystery realm expert. Today, even if His Royal Highness wants to personally test the background of that person, Su Yanbing will also intervene. The Su Fingnian of Jianghu can take the risk, but His Royal Highness of Beiliang can't. Han Laozhan smiled and said, that's good. Otherwise, if that guy is really killed by His Royal Highness, those military officers won't have anything to do. We can't let these officials come here and eat the northwest wind. On the Post Road. Chapter 959. Putting away his folding fan, the young master who had his crossing the river knife pulled on the reins and lightly dodged the bloody human skin. Indifferent to the movement's sudden death, he smiled and said, Han Xingxian can kill celestial phenomenon with 1 finger. It's not unusual for a 2nd class to kill a 1st class. He saw that Su Fingnian was expressionless and didn't seem to be interested in talking to him, so he was happy to talk to himself. But that's not surprising, but it's very surprising that you're proficient in the art of skinning human cats. I just don't know if you know the last 2 realms of scraping bones and pulling out tendons. He turned his wrist, and Bai Qiao, who was pulled along by the long rope, spun around as he looked down at the Prince of Beiliang who had come alone. Zhao Guo had a confidential file specially collected for His Royal Highness, which was only slightly thinner than Chao Changqing's in the Heavenly Archive Room. He had casually flipped through it earlier, and it had truly broadened his horizons. Han Diaoxi, who was said to have died of an illness in the Imperial Palace, had actually been killed by the young man in front of him with a flying sword outside godly martial city. Logically speaking, Su Fengnian's realm had plummeted after Master Lu Hao's beating, so it wasn't too difficult for him to kill a movement at the Vajra realm, but it also wasn't easy. The crux of the matter was how this Su fellow had obtained the unusual finger mystic realm of human cats. He didn't believe that there was anyone else in the world who had been lucky enough to comprehend the finger mystic realm's looking glass technique, which was known as pointing straight to the heart of heaven. Not only did it have a photographic memory, it could also extract the essence. The reason why the female sword attendant in the Wu family sword mound, the one who carried the Su of Gojoseon on her back, could steal sword techniques and sword intent, no matter how obscure they were, was more of an instinct that only happened once in 100 years. However, she was limited to stealing other people's sword techniques, and was still a little inferior to Jiang Ding's ability to accept everything. If this Su fellow had the same aptitude as Jiang Ding, then Jiang Ding really wouldn't be able to eat or sleep in peace. Since ancient times, one mountain couldn't accommodate 2 tigers, even if this mountain was the entire Jianghu. The Jianghu was indeed very big, but Jiang Ding was very narrow-minded and couldn't tolerate any potential opponent who had the chance to stand side by side with him. Earlier, Jiang Ding had seen Su Fellow kill Yu Zhang very clearly. First, it was Dong Tai's flying sword pinning technique, then it was Han Diaoxi's skinning technique. Both of them were top killing techniques in the world. Yu Zhang's attacks were completely disorganized and he tried to kill Jiang Ding with a single blow using his Vajra realm physique. How could there be such a good thing in the world? However, Jiang Ding didn't find this strange. Yu Zhang had just entered the first-rank state and was immediately scared out of his wits by Han Diaoxi. Since then, he had been as timid as a mouse and had never fought with a master of the same level. Therefore, it was definitely not good to be reckless in the Jianghu, but it was also not good to be overly concerned with one's cultivation and thus cherish one's life too much. Jiang Ding raised his wrist and twirled the red string of his saber with 2 fingers. The crossing the river was still spinning as he bent down to look at Su Fengnian. There's an extremely powerful master at the top of the mountain. I definitely can't beat him, and even if I wanted to escape, I might not be able to escape alive. However, you and I are about the same age and background. You, Su Fengnian, can be considered a noble family, but I'm not bad either. Those dukes and marquises of Zhulu Mountain are also people who occupy mountains and call themselves kings. However, in terms of seniority, they still have to call me martial granduncle or something. Therefore, in the so-called Jianghu of Yu Zhang and the others, there's no one with a better background than me. How about it? Do you dare to fight me to the death? Don't worry, even if I can kill you, I won't. I still want to live well and go to Beiliang's frontier fortress to experience Beimang's desert scenery. Su Fengnian, Beiliang is your territory. It's up to you whether you want to fight or not. If you dare, I'll accompany you to the end. If you lose, I'll give you this, crossing the river pawn, in my hand. If you don't dare and want to be a coward, I'll immediately turn around and run. Su Fengnian laughed. I dare, but no matter how powerful you are, you're only at the level of the 5th raccoon. Compared to a human cat, you're a long way off. However, whether you dare or not is one thing, whether you want to or not is another. You should run. I'll give you the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn. After that, Lingzhou's deputy general, Han Laozhan, will lead the troops to suppress the bandits. Oh, let me tell you, you've been appointed by the imperial court to weave official documents and court bulletins. I estimate that very soon, you'll reach the prince's mansion and the administrator's residence at the same time. However, I'll pretend I didn't see you. I'll say this first. While you're on the run, I won't count if you hurt anyone, but if you kill any soldier, I'll make you lose an arm. If you can make any cavalry throw away their armor, I'll remember your kindness. Jiang Fuding didn't panic even though his amulet was so easily torn away. He straightened up on his horse and smiled. I heard you went with Li Chungang to Guangling River. How come I didn't see you learn the old god of swordsmanship? You're quite despicable. Su Fengnian reached out and grabbed the human skin of the movement. He was prepared to hang it on the easternmost city of Lingzhou along with the bones. He wanted to tell the restless foreign Jianghu people what kind of price they had to pay if they wanted to stir up trouble in Beiliang. Outside Shenhui City, Su Fengnian had not only collected some humans, cats, and a few remaining red snakes, but he had also collected some secrets from the skull. Among them was the Vajra movement of Mao Julu, who was in charge of waiting for rabbits to find out. Su Fengnian expressionlessly raised the human skin. Jiang Fuding suddenly shook his wrist and tightly gripped this pawn that had never appeared in the Jianghu. After Jiang Fuding made this murderous move, Su Yanbing also raised his spear at the top of the mountain. Finally, Jiang Fuding laughed loudly, his thick killing intent dissipating. Su Fengnian, don't force yourself. Since you've been beaten up badly by the movement, spit out blood if you want to. Don't suffer because you want to save face. Su Fengnian smiled. There's only half an incense stick left. Jiang Fuding smiled. That's not right. There should be half an incense stick left. Su Fengnian said calmly, my incense stick is different from yours. Jiang Fuding sighed and loosened the red rope. The famous blade and its white scabbard hung from it. He stared deeply at this guy, then silently turned his horse around. He was confident that he could win against Su Yanbing, but even if he killed him, he would die at the hands of the master on the mountaintop. It was not worth it. His life was much more valuable than that of the crown prince of Beiliang. A voice suddenly came from behind him. Leave the blade. You don't deserve it anyway. With his back to Su Fengnian, the young man in the black robe looked gloomy, as if he was hesitating whether or not to use the blade. In the end, Jiang Fuding did not turn around. With a shake of his wrist, he broke the red rope, grabbed the pawn, and threw it to the back of his head. Su Fengnian's pupils contracted, and his body did not move an inch. The spear on the mountaintop streaked across the sky, hitting the seemingly slow and leisurely falling blade. There was lightning in the square inch. A huge ravine was blasted open on the road. The momentum of the blade, which contained evil intentions, was shattered by the spear, and it happened to fall on top of Su Fengnian's head. Su Fengnian reached out to take the white scabbard blade and wrapped the human skin in the scabbard. After the dust settled, the horse was still there, but that person was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 960. Once Jiang Fuding left, the peregrine falcons in the sky and the scouts on the ground also moved. Huang Xiaokuai led the Pearl Cavalry in pursuit to the east. Among them was Han Laoshan, who oversaw. The military orders were quickly passed to the northern commandant Ren Chunyun and the Fengqiu commandant Zhu Boyu. Su Fengnian gave Yu Zhang's skin and bones to a few retainers to be sent to the easternmost part of Beiliang's road, Fengxi City. When he slowly reached the top of the mountain, the frozen field commandant Ma Jinchai brushed past the Pearl Cavalry. He brought a few personal guards and retainers with him to the top of the mountain. By the time he reached the top of the mountain, he was already panting. Seeing His Royal Highness, who had a blade at his waist and a blade in his hand, about to enter the carriage, he quickly dismounted and knelt to beg for forgiveness. Based on Ma Jinchai's past personality, if His Royal Highness had not killed one person and driven the other away, and if the master and servant had not tried to kill him, he would have been too lazy to go up and be scolded. He would have just left the mess to his family's elders to deal with. His Ma family, from his grandfather's generation to his father's generation, all had military achievements. They were all old generals who had contributed greatly to the Su family. He, Ma Jinchai, did not believe that His Highness would remove him from his commandant position to the end. Even if His Highness was so unreasonable, with Ma Jinchai's in-laws with Beiliang's military chief, Yan Wenluan, was there a need to be afraid that he would not be able to make a comeback? However, Ma Jinchai knew that in this encirclement, his frozen field cavalry was at a disadvantage. In the beginning, he wanted to go for wool and come home shorn. Instead, he showed his bare buttocks to His Highness and the two Lingzhou deputy generals. He wanted to come to the top of the mountain to be scolded by His Highness and vent his anger on the spot. His position as a commandant would be kept. Ma Jinchai, who was a descendant of a general, was careless in his management of the army, but he still knew a bit about the rules of the officialdom. Su Fengnian had just raised his foot to sit in the carriage when he heard the frozen field commandant sobbing behind him. He turned around and walked toward Ma Jinchai. Ma Jinchai heard the footsteps and quickly raised his head to take a look. He saw that His Highness's expression was calm. He had heard many rumors about His Highness, so he was not sure about His Highness's temperament. Fortunately, he did not directly reveal his anger. This made Ma Jinchai feel a bit more at ease. He thought that their Ma family indeed had some reputation. Even His Highness had to be careful and not vent his anger on Ma Jinchai. Just as Ma Jinchai thought that he had escaped a disaster, Su Fengnian stepped on Ma Jinchai's fat head. Half of his head smashed into the ground, and he fainted on the spot. The 3 retainers followed the commandant and knelt on the ground. They were dumbstruck from fright. They immediately lowered their gazes and stared at the ground. Their hearts rose and fell. Then, they quickly heard the ruthless His Royal Highness say coldly, "Carry this piece of trash away. When he wakes up, tell him that the Frozen Field Cavalry has been disbanded. Including the 3 of you, 600 people will be recorded and will never be employed in the Bailiang army again. If you want to join the army again, you have to use your father's military achievements to offset it. If you don't want to, then be a good-for-nothing son of Lingzhou for the rest of your life. If you commit a crime in the future, you will all be heavily punished. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Right now, Ma Jinchai is just like you." Wei Shaking and Xayanima, who had stayed at the top of the mountain, quietly looked at each other. They both realized that the other party could not laugh. Previously, all of the generals in Lingzhou, big and small, were laughing at the civil officials of Lingzhou, including Li Gongda. Now, the tables had turned. It seemed like the civil officials had a chance to gloat over the general's misfortune. Fortunately, the 2 commandants of Tongmen Pass had always been aloof from the Lingzhou officialdom. They had always been considered by Bailiang as his trusted aides. Otherwise, the 2 of them would probably have a good time eating a pot of hard liquor. The generals of the same province did not have good days. Wei Shaking and Xayanima, who held elite troops, could not help but feel a bit of sympathy. Su Fengnian stepped on Ma Jinchai and knocked her out. He then turned to Wei Shaking and Xayanima and cupped his fists with a smile. "I'll have to trouble the 2 of you to guard Tongmen Pass. In the future, when Bailiang restructures, you might have to call Commandant Wei and Commandant Xayan in terms of official titles. However, the ranks will not change. Furthermore, Tongmen Pass is an important location, so the salaries of the generals will also be increased. If you need superior warhorses and military equipment, you can directly ask me." The 2 commandants immediately knelt down to thank him. Not lowering their ranks meant that they would not touch Tongmen Pass. Furthermore, His Highness' verbal promise was real. In the past, if the Lingzhou military officials wanted to fight over warhorses and weapons with Yuliangzu on the border, they could not even think about it. Those were all things that were left over from other people's mouths. For example, Wei Shaking and Xayanima would occasionally meet up and drink with their colleagues who had returned home after taking leave. Even if they faced those commandants of lower ranks, they still felt inferior. Looking at the situation, His Royal Highness had recently promoted the new Lingzhou provincial governor and His Highness. It was clear that he was telling Bailiang that he did not like Lingzhou's officialdom. However, it seemed that he would only place more importance on Lingzhou's military town. This made Wei Shaking and Xayanima, who hoped to continue climbing the ranks, extremely happy. Su Fengnian purposely left things blank, allowing the 2 commandants to chew on the aftertaste. Sitting in the carriage, it was still Su Yanbing who acted as the coachman to chase after that Jiang Fuding. It was enough to have Han Laozhan, who was at the finger-profound realm, as a stabilizing force. It was not like he was a human cat. An expert at the level of Han Xingxian was roaming around Bailiang. There was no need for him to use Su Yanbing, who had a chance of winning against Hong Jingyan, as a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. He needed to rush north to the border and then meet up with Su Shao. Pei Nanwei saw that Su Fengnian had an additional white scabbard long saber in his hand and was a little curious. Back then, when she was outside, she did not see this scene on the road in detail. Through the rough conversation between the 2 Lingzhou deputy generals and the 2 commandants, she knew that after he went down the mountain, he killed that seemingly unstoppable first-rank Vidra realm expert. Regarding this, Pei Nanwei was not that surprised. Back then, this young man brought 200 cavalry and confronted the old king of Jing'an, Zhao Heng's 1,000 cavalry. He even dared to raise his spear and kill people in front of the formation. Pei Nanwei shifted her position and sat in a corner. She placed the saber on her knees, and blood seeped out of her 7 orifices. It seemed like it was not easy for him to kill people just now. He waited until there was no one around before revealing his weakness. Pei Nanwei smiled. Was she actually laughing at herself for not being human? However, Su Fengnian mistook it as mocking him. He glanced at her coldly. Pei Nanwei did not mind and asked, "Why don't you go and beat the dog that is down?" Chapter 961. Su Fengnian had only pulled out the river crossing pawn by 2 inches, but the interior of the carriage was already filled with a sense of honor. Even Pei Nanwei could not help but take a few more glances. When Su Fengnian unsheathed the river crossing pawn, Pei Nanwei felt a chill seeping into her skin. She could not help but wrap her arms around her chest to resist the chill. Probably because he noticed his sorry state from the blade that was as clear as a mirror, Su Fengnian used his sleeve to wipe the blood off his face and tapped the middle of the blade with a finger. Unexpectedly, the river crossing pawn did not tilt up like other heavy weapons. Instead, the blade rippled, quietly eliminating the vibrations caused by Su Fengnian's finger tapping. In the eyes of outsiders, the river crossing pawn looked like an extremely arrogant and beautiful woman, unmoved by all the flattery of men. When Su Fengnian mentioned the river crossing pawn, it was almost in front of his eyes. Only then did he realize that the blade was engraved with complicated and obscure talisman cloud patterns, like the rolling clouds, full of vitality. The eye-opening Su Fengnian could not help but sigh, "This blade is alive." Pei Nanwei was really sarcastic this time. She laughed and asked, "Is there still an object in this world that can move His Royal Highness?" Su Fengnian did not turn his head. He stared at the enchanting scenery floating on the blade and calmly said, "Aren't there 2 in the carriage?" The river crossing pawn was one, and the other was naturally her, Pei Nanwei. Pei Nanwei sneered, "This little girl is really honored." Su Fengnian put the blade back into its sheath and laughed, "You're a little girl. You're a woman in your early 30s. If you got married and had children in the countryside, you might have become a grandmother by now." These words, when placed in the Jianghu where men and women fought against each other, were no different from the killing power of a sword immortal. As expected, Pei Nanwei was so angry that her chest trembled slightly. She pressed one hand on her chest and the other hand on her thigh, trying to calm her emotions. She smiled sweetly, "Look at how much blood you've lost. If I weigh it, it must be several kilograms, right? Does it hurt?" Su Fengnian, who was leaning against the carriage, did not say anything. He stretched out 2 fingers and pinched her thigh. Pei Nanwei's eyebrows knitted together, but she did not make a sound. Su Fengnian loosened his fingers. Pei Nanwei heaved a sigh of relief. She did not expect Su Fengnian to repeat his old trick. Pei Nanwei sucked in a breath of cold air. Her dignified and gentle face, which made this Princess Jing and become one of the most beautiful women in the world, looked very painful. Su Fengnian seemed to be addicted. He repeated it several times until Pei Nanwei, who did not say anything to stop him, became numb. Her hatred for him could not be any greater. To this young man, who she wanted to cut into pieces, she, Pei Nanwei, was indeed the same as the famous white sheath saber that was snatched from other people's hands. They were both objects that were snatched because they were moved. When they were bored, they would play with it. When they were not free, they would put it back into the sheath and not even look at it, leaving it to be covered in dust. Su Fengnian finally stopped deliberately letting Pei Nanwei suffer this kind of physical pain. Needless to say, her slender thigh was already bruised and swollen. Su Fengnian switched to his palm and placed it on her thigh. Pei Nanwei's pain was like a spring breeze that melted the snow. However, this made Pei Nanwei feel even more humiliated as a plaything. She bit her lips until her thin lips were bleeding. Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, "The first time will be very painful. Later on, it will be nothing more than that. You asked me if it hurts when I bleed from my 7 orifices. In fact, it's the same reason as you. When I say these things, you most likely won't listen, so I can only let you feel it. How about it, now that you know that it doesn't hurt, you already feel that it is a kind of happiness. That's why, we are all cheap goods. We don't know the good fortune of standing and talking. I once heard a joke, saying that the poor commoners wondered whether the old emperor would eat scallion pancakes for every meal. They thought it was funny. When I first traveled to Jianghu, I only realized that being able to fill my stomach when I ate those cornbread and roasted sweet potatoes. I was so happy that I didn't even think about those delicacies. A person's happiness and suffering are different depending on where they live, but the depth is roughly the same. That's why no one should look down on anyone, no one should laugh at anyone. Anything can be fought for, but the place of reincarnation is something that no matter how hard you work, you can't fight for in this lifetime. When encountering injustice, being able to accept one's fate is a skill, and being able to put your life on the line is even more amazing. However, those who are unwilling to accept their fate and are willing to put their life on the line are also not good, because they often do things without a bottom line and like to harm others. Yuan Tingshan, who rose to the top in Jizhou, is one such example. I've seen all kinds of people at the bottom of the Jianghu, and I've seen all kinds of people at the top of Mount Qingliang. I've never liked to associate with those who don't have a bottom line. Pei Nanwei sneered, if you weren't the hereditary heir of Beiliang, who would be willing to exchange pleasantries with you? Don't even talk about flattery. It's only because you reincarnated well that you have the qualifications to say these things. For the first time, Su Fengnian didn't refute, and grunted in agreement. However, not only did Pei Nanwei not have the feeling of returning victorious, she actually felt somewhat dull. The heir of the king of Jing'an, Xiao Sun, was undoubtedly one of those who reincarnated well, but so what? Su Fengnian suddenly asked, I'm going to take a trip to the desolate border that borders Beimang. Do you want to see the desert scenery? I've been to Beimang before, and I've seen the clouds fall with my own eyes. It's like the sky and the earth are aligned. It's really not bad. Seeing this, one's state of mind can also be a bit more open. In the northernmost part of Yuzhou, there's also a mountain called Rooster Crow. When day and night alternate, the sand sounds like a rooster crowing in the morning. Pei Nanwei didn't directly answer, but asked in passing, you're going to the border to participate in the military parade? What, has the great general already begun to prepare for you to be the hereditary heir of the king of Beiliang? He's afraid that you won't be able to convince the masses, so he's going to personally hold the line for you in the Beiliang border army? As soon as these words came out, Pei Nanwei was as silent as a cicada in winter. She wasn't afraid of the young man beside her, who she had the confidence to be on equal footing with, but from the bottom of her heart, she was afraid of the old man with a hunchback and a smile whenever she bumped into him in Beiliang Palace. That old man was old, but Pei Nanwei still couldn't imagine when and where the old man would die. If the old man finally died, would the fallen 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn be able to close their eyes in peace? Su Fengnian silently left the carriage, requested a warhorse from Tongmen Pass, and rode it alone. Would a Beiliang without Su Xiao still be a Beiliang? At this time, a simple carriage quietly entered the desolate border of Beimang, which had been trampled by the Beiliang cavalry. The coachman was the second most powerful person in the world, to Oba Bodhisattva. Chapter 962. Winter passed and spring came. Orioles sang among hundreds of birds. Flocks of small orioles could often be seen shuttling among the green grasses on both sides of the post-house road in Yuzhou. Unfortunately, Beiliang had a rough folk culture, and there were no scholars who would go to listen to orioles singing yellow opera in spring. A carriage was moving slowly northward. A woman in the carriage was holding an oriole's nest that she picked from a low branch. Occasionally, she would lift the curtain to take a look at the scenery along the way. Along the way, in order to save time, she seldom stopped in the city. She was in the middle of nowhere, and the most embarrassing thing for a woman was that she had 3 urgent needs. The first time she wanted to go to the toilet, she clenched her legs and gritted her teeth to hold on for half an hour. However, the man, who had long sensed that something was wrong, didn't say anything. When she finally couldn't hold it anymore and asked to get off the carriage, she lowered her head and sat back in the carriage. She even heard a bad joke from the man. He said that there was once an official who dressed incognito to observe the public's opinion, but his stomach felt uncomfortable in the wilderness. Every time he wanted to go to the toilet, he asked the coachman to find a quiet place for him to take off his pants. The coachman found several places for the official, but every time the official untied his belt and squatted down, he didn't want to go there anymore. Later, whenever the official asked if he had found a place, the coachman said no. Finally, the official couldn't stand it anymore, so he jumped off the carriage and took off his pants while running. In the end, he even added fuel to the fire by asking her if she had found a place with good feng shui. On the way back, she had conveniently picked up a bird's nest made of pine needles and grass. After hearing his words, she threw it at him fiercely. The man gently caught the bird's nest with one hand and handed it back to her with a smile. He made up for his mistake by telling her an embarrassing story. He said that when he was traveling, he accidentally went to the toilet and heard a lot of noise next door. He was bored to death, so he opened his mouth to tease his brother a few times. In the end, his toilet door was torn down by a female hero with a cold face with a sword. He was so scared that he almost fell into the toilet pit. He quickly covered his crotch with his hands. In the end, the female hero coldly threatened to cut off his 3 legs. This Mother Kerr really is a loose tongue. If he hadn't been quick-witted and suddenly let go of his hand, letting that heroine have a good look at what it means to have a great display of masculinity, scaring her away, he probably wouldn't have been able to avoid a good beating. Pei Nanwei didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she saw him say these shameful words. She didn't argue with him anymore. Even the heir apparent of Beiliang was so embarrassed. She, a woman who was no longer the princess consort of a vassal state, was too lazy to pretend to be a heroine. On this trip north to the border, peregrine falcons had been constantly passing on secret reports. Naturally, Su Fengnian did not tell her the important military information, but he did tell her all the harmless secrets. For example, the Qingqing prince Wu Lingsu of the Qingyang Palace had entered the capital to be conferred a title. He had been given half a cup of the Taoist master's mansion's minister of feathered dress and was able to rule across the river. He had great power and was in charge of the North and South Taoist schools together. The high and mighty Longhu Mountain seemed to be unable to bear such grievances and quickly took out their trump card. It was said that their leader Zhao Danxia had cultivated the most difficult Jade Emperor Tower in Taoism and ascended together with the old Taoist master Zhao Shi. Then the imperial court immediately allowed Prime Minister Qingzi Zhao Danping in the capital to be the leader of the Southern Taoist sect. They also made an exception and granted the young Taoist master of the Taoist master's residence, Zhao Ningxin, to be an official in the imperial court. He became the emperor's personal attendant who was even more envied than Huang Men. There was another thing that had nothing to do with the imperial court. It was purely a matter of Jianghu people. The nameless old swordsman who was addicted to eating swords finally made a move. However, it wasn't Wang Xinji of the martial emperor city who did it himself. Instead, he let his 4 direct disciples block the sword one by one. The first 3 disciples who were recognized as geniuses were unable to block the sword. In the end, the eldest disciple, Yu Groom, who had always been hidden by his junior brother, blocked the sword with his saber. This shocked Jianghu. This sabersman was immediately regarded as a top master who could make General Gu Jiantang fight with all his strength. Pei Nanwei didn't have the slightest interest in these secrets that made the blood of all Jianghu people boil. They went in one ear and out the other. She just took it as a joke to relieve her boredom. When they were close to the frontier fortress, the carriage stopped for a while in Qingshan County. Su Fengnian specially took Pei Nanwei to a restaurant to eat a local dish called green essence rice, which was made by crushing the leaves of nanju, soaking the rice in its juice and steaming it. It was green in color and had a tempting aroma. However, the large blue and white porcelain bowl used to hold the rice was almost a foot wide, which made Pei Nanwei stunned. She went all out and ate less than half of the bowl before she couldn't swallow it. Su Fengnian finished his own bowl like a whirlwind in clouds and took Pei Nanwei's bowl without hesitation. He still enjoyed the meal with relish. Su Yanbing didn't enter the restaurant earlier. When he showed up later, he was accompanied by a middle-aged man in satin casual clothes. Su Fengnian, who was still eating with his head lowered, waved his hand and motioned for the strange-looking man to sit down. After the man sat down, he said softly, "Greetings to His Royal Highness." Su Fengnian put down his empty bowl and chopsticks and leaned lazily against the back of the crudely made and slightly rugged chair. He joked with a smile, "Huang Fuqing, what are you calling me? I've already changed from Commandant Guai Yi to General Yuzhou, who is in charge of the military power of a province. Are you still used to it?" Huang Fuqing, who was already the new general of Yuzhou, didn't have the fear and modesty of an ordinary general. He only said in a deep voice, "I dare not disappoint your highness even if I have to die 10,000 times." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Chen Shiliang is in charge of the salt policy. If he doesn't ask you for help, you don't have to think too highly of yourself and let those unrestrained local tyrants do whatever they want. When Chen Shiliang asks you to borrow soldiers to kill someone, you can take action. At that time, don't be soft-hearted." Huang Fucheng's speed of promotion in the northern Liang path was second only to the provincial governor of Lingzhou, Su Beiji. He was fully deserving of being His Highness' trusted aide. However, the price he had to pay was so great that it made one's heart turn cold. He had to watch his entire clan die out. Huang Fuqing, who was so obsessed with being an official that he went crazy, naturally had a good reputation in the officialdom of Yuzhou. However, Huang Fuqing was fighting with his back to the wall in Beiliang. No one was willing to sit at the same table with such a treacherous villain even if he wanted to form a clique. This kind of puppet was most suitable to be used as a borrowed knife to kill people. It could be said that whoever used him would feel relieved. However, in Beiliang, only Su Fengnian was qualified to hold a knife. The more you talk, the more mistakes you make. In addition, Huang Fuqing had always believed in using meritorious deeds to exchange for official positions. Even if he had a meteoric rise, he still gave people the illusion that he was unhappy. Su Fengnian didn't care whether this general of Yuzhou had eaten or not. He still ordered a bowl of green rice for him and said with a smile, "You've integrated the Jianghu forces in Yuzhou well. My sister has a good opinion of you. I'll allow you to generously extend your hands and feet to Liangzhou in the future. By the way, you'll pay for the meal. I'll take it that you've done your duty as a host." Huang Fuqing stood up and respectfully saw His Royal Highness off. After sitting down, he wolfed down the rice. In the end, he took out all the gold and silver in the restaurant's waiter's eyes, which looked at him like he was an idiot. He placed them on the table and swaggered away. His duty as a host. He had bought the military power of the entire Yuzhou with the gold and silver he carried with him. Was it expensive or cheap? The carriage drove out of Qingshan County City. Su Fengnian lay comfortably in the carriage, crossing his legs and burping. Pei Nanwei sneered and said, "Isn't this notorious Huang Fuqing the person you said has no bottom line? Aren't you also comfortable using him?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "How do you know he has no bottom line? Huang Fuqing, and even Chu Lushan, are actually not as simple as the outside world thinks. Naturally, they have nothing to do with good people. But when it comes to whether they have a bottom line or not, in my opinion, they have a much higher bottom line than those talkative and famous scholars who keep saying that they are worried about the country and the people while having sex with prostitutes. Those who regard themselves too much as human beings will easily not regard others as human beings. Those who do not regard themselves as human beings will, on the contrary, leave a little bit of a pure heart. To make an inappropriate comparison, Mount Wudang and Mount Longhu are both Taoist ancestral courts. The Taoist Master's Mansion's yellow-purple noble lady is full of immortal aura, so high and unapproachable that only high-ranking officials and dignitaries can walk through that door. The old Taoist with the highest seniority on Mount Wudang does not have any immortal aura, but he can chat with the common people and pilgrims about their daily lives. Who do you think is more humane? Huang Fuqing is my lackey. Whether it's me, His Royal Highness, or Huang Fuqing himself, we won't deny it. But if Huang Fuqing really wants this Yuzhou general to pour out his grievances, you won't have the heart to listen. Pei Nanwei flatly said, I don't want to hear it either. Su Fingnian sighed and said, every family has its own difficulties. Only Qing Feng, who flips through books for no reason, knows about it. Pei Nanwei was stunned. She laughed and said, I didn't know that you would also be sad about the passing of spring. Su Fingnian rolled his eyes and said, I'm a talented scholar who can write hundreds of poems in a year, okay? Pei Nanwei squinted and said, buying poems and copying poems counts. Su Fingnian laughed and said, if I didn't spend a lot of money to buy these poems of Beiliang's poor scholars, do you think they would have enough money to travel thousands of miles to the capital to take the imperial examination? Pei Nanwei asked in return, has anyone ever said good things about you and remembered your kindness? Su Fingnian's mouth twitched. There was a rare awkwardness on his face. It's probably because I didn't hear it. Pei Nanwei sneered and said, moreover, Beiliang is barren and the number of scholars is even fewer. In the end, you gave them all to the imperial court with both hands. You, His Royal Highness, are really magnanimous. Su Fingnian rubbed his stomach, which could fill 2 big blue and white bowls of rice, and said self-mockingly, my magnanimity is not small. But good people have good karma. Didn't nearly 1,000 foreign scholars come to Beiliang to take root? Chapter 963. To the north of Qingan County in Yuzhou was Yanji County. The reason why it was called Yanji County was that Yanji County's wives were famous for their beauty. Even in the Central Plains, some rich old men in Jiangnan Circuit would take pride in marrying a young woman from Yanji County as a concubine. Most of the beautiful women from Yanji County who were unwilling to suffer hardships preferred to leave the border for the rich and fertile Central Plains, never to return. Even though many of them had fallen into prostitution, they would never turn back. Thus, they were mocked by the Liang imperial court as flowers in the wall, fragrance outside the wall. There was another Yanji County with the same name in Yanji County, which was full of beautiful women. It was a man's good fortune to marry a Yanji County woman and bring her home to warm his bed. If an official in Yuzhou didn't have a Yanji County woman as a concubine or a concubine, he wouldn't have the face to go out and greet his colleagues. Pei Nanwei might have been tired of wearing that cumbersome curtain hat. When she entered the inn in Yanji County to spend the night, she abandoned the curtain hat and was shocked by the men and women who were lucky enough to recognize her face. Today was the Lantern Festival of the first year of Xiangfu. The Lantern Festival was a big festival. Officials and people enjoyed it together and went out to enjoy the lanterns together. Yuzhou was obviously very different from Lingzhou, which had a granary. Although the lantern market was lively, it didn't have a glorious aura. Men and women's clothes were also mostly simple, unlike Lingzhou, which liked to be luxurious. Yuzhou was neither Liangzhou where the Su family lived nor Lingzhou, which was relatively stable and comfortable. Yuzhou had always been mocked by the officials of Yuzhou as being raised by a stepmother. Of course, they didn't forget to bring 1 or 2 Yanji County women who were bought with a lot of money. As a stepping stone for the unfamiliar official career, it was tacky to give money. If they gave too little, they would be looked down on. Giving women was both elegant and practical. Su Fingnian and Pei Nanwei walked side by side. They looked like a perfect couple. In the night, they could only see Pei Nanwei's face from afar. Therefore, they didn't cause too much of a stir. However, those who had seen her face and figure didn't want to go too far away. If she wasn't in their bowl, they could take a few more glances at her bowl to satisfy their craving. Some idle ruffians were quite bold. They wanted to take advantage of the crowd to take advantage of her. However, they were kicked far away by Su Fengnian. They were just shrimps who looked fierce but were timid at heart. They were angry but didn't dare to say anything. Furthermore, they were in the wrong first. After that, they became much more restrained. Originally, they wanted to pretend to call for people to gang up on the child. However, no one was willing to take a few more glances at the beautiful woman on the mural. Therefore, they gave up bitterly. In addition, in Yuzhou, the government would turn a blind eye to fights. However, if they made trouble in the lantern market, they would definitely be caught and skinned by the patrolling soldiers. There were 3 scholars walking in front of Su Fengnian and Pei Nanwei. Judging from their accents, they were scholars from the Central Plains. Most likely, they had heard that Yanji County was full of beauties and could be easily found on the streets. Therefore, they came here to try their luck. Beiliang women were bold and unrestrained, so they might have a short-lived marriage. The 3 young scholars had already seen the beautiful young woman behind them. Due to etiquette and self-esteem, they didn't have the nerve to strike up a conversation with her. Therefore, they could only slow down their steps and deliberately speak in a loud voice. It was as if they were competing to see who could speak more shockingly. Some said that they were relatives of a certain official in Lingzhou and would soon enter the county government office to become an official. Some said that it had always been the Liang dynasty who had been watching Beiliang with ulterior motives. Now that West Chu was about to be reinstated, Beiliang could finally sit down and eat melon seeds while watching the imperial court make a fool of itself. There were also some who said that since childhood, they had yearned for the iron horses and golden spears of the frontier fortress. Which scholar had given up the scholarly honor that was within reach and had come to this impoverished land to enlist in the army? When Su Fengnian heard one of the scholars mention the endlessly prattling West Chu's victory and defeat, he smiled and quickened his pace. He took the initiative to ask, "Young master, how do you know that the rain station of West Chu is destined to end miserably within half a year?" The scholar, who did indeed have a somewhat refined temperament, did not reply to Su Fengnian. Instead, he shot a glance at Pei Nanwei and introduced himself. "This young one is a descendant of the Fan family in Huansha County, Gangnam-do." Su Fengnian went with the flow and feigned surprise. The Fan family in Huansha County is the most famous county in the south of the old northern Han. I never imagined that young Master Fan's background would be so illustrious. There are only a few families like this in all of Beiliang. It is certain that even the prefects of Beiliang would treat you as an honored guest. It is an honor to meet young Master Fan. The other scholar also hurriedly introduced himself. He was from the Shizhao Zhou family in Dongyue. The remaining scholar, probably because he was of ordinary birth, was speechless and indignant. In reality, the Fan family in Huansha County and the Shizhao Zhou family were flourishing during the spring and autumn period. They were not first-rate families that were unreachable. As long as one had the surname of Fan and Zhou, most of them would be relatives. No one would take them seriously. These 2 scholars had clearly come to Beiliang, where their horizons were not broad, in order to make up the numbers. In this era where even the servants of wealthy families had sharp eyes and could see the depth of a family's wealth with just a belt, such clumsy tricks were not worth mentioning. They had clearly underestimated the abilities of Beiliang's officials. Beiliang was poor, but the poor were the common people who faced the earth and the sky. The officials were not poor at all. Su Fengnian had originally wanted to fish for information and amuse himself. Unexpectedly, Pei Nanwei's words were truly earth-shattering. "What does your surnames and names have to do with this old lady? This old lady only likes robust men over 200 gene." The three of you can scram to the side and cool off." It was as if the three scholars had been struck by lightning. Afterwards, they didn't even dare to let out a fart, leaving with their tails between their legs. Su Fingnian gave Pei Nanwei a thumbs up. She ran her fingers through her hair and turned her head. When she turned her head, the corners of her mouth curled up. She had a rare expression on her face that said, "If this old lady doesn't make a move, she will be invincible." Su Fingnian touched the pot that didn't boil. He clicked his tongue and praised, "Beiliang is really a place with good feng shui. Sister Pei has also been infected with heroic spirit." Pei Nanwei scowled coldly. She kicked the back of Su Fingnian's shoe and twisted it hard. Su Fingnian was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion, let alone pain. He muttered to himself, "It's only been half a year." Chao Chongqing and Sun Shiji, two great remnants of West Chu, working together shouldn't be so useless, right? Pei Nanwei said coldly, "A lot of people will die." Su Fingnian's eyes were ice cold. He said slowly, "Yes, a lot of people will die. But you also have to know that there are so many people in West Chu who have shaved their hair and fled to Zen. They don't hesitate to shut themselves in cellars and escape into the mountains to become wild elders. They've lost their minds and are patrolling the city in the middle of the night, shouting that everyone is a ghost. They're all living a life worse than death. This group of wandering ghosts who can't forget the West Chu dynasty can't wait to drag their families down with them. You don't even know how to evaluate such foolishly loyal remnants." Pei Nanwei said hatefully, "If they want to die a worthy death, no one can stop them. But don't implicate the innocent people who just want to live a peaceful life and have a good night's sleep." Su Fingnian said with a smile, "In the past, I always felt that you were lifeless, like a female ghost in human skin who haunts ancient temples deep in the mountains. Only today do I know that you can still speak human language. Why don't you stay in Yanji County? Maybe you'll become a living person in the future. When you miss the reeds by Tide Hark Lake, you can go back and take a look." Pei Nanwei said without hesitation, "Okay." Su Fingnian was momentarily absent-minded. He seemed to have said these words to others before. However, Su Fingnian quickly recovered and nodded with a smile. "Then I'll have to show off my status as the heir. I'll ask the governor of Yanji County to arrange a private residence for you where no one will disturb you." Su Fingnian asked for directions and arrived at the governor's mansion. Unfortunately, the governor had also brought a large group of family members to enjoy themselves with the common people. The gatekeeper, who had trained a pair of discerning eyes, saw that Su Fingnian had an extraordinary aura and had him sit in a small room by the side door. After waiting for 4 whole hours, even the gatekeeper was somewhat impressed by the young man's patience. During this time, the gatekeeper solicitously inquired about his well-being and served him tea. Naturally, this was because Su Fingnian had taken advantage of the beauty Pei Nanwei's reputation. Governor Hong Shandong rubbed his eyes as he returned in high spirits. He had never set foot in Beiliang Palace in his life and didn't recognize the young master. However, he recognized the retainer, who could only stand. It was the general's personal bodyguard, Su Yanbing. One year, when the general was patrolling the border, he passed by Yanji County. Hong Shandong was fortunate enough to meet him once. This person was actually qualified to eat and drink with the general. His memory was especially vivid. If Su Yanbing had to stand, then who was the young man sitting and drinking tea? Hong Shandong wasn't an idiot. He immediately collected his thoughts and waved his sleeves. With a plop, he knelt on the ground and paid his respects to His Royal Highness who had come to his humble abode. The large group of Hong family descendants crowded outside the small room widened their eyes. The older ones knew the ways of the world and were somewhat fearful. The younger ones' clean eyes were filled with childlike curiosity. Although the threshold of the governor's mansion wasn't low, the highest position received by the governor was only the previous general of Yuzhou. How high was His Royal Highness's position? When this young man put on the yellow official robe and became the king of Bailiang, everyone in Liang would know how high his position was. Hong Shandong didn't have the courage to look at Pei Nanwei from beginning to end. After knowing that this woman with no clear status would live in Yanji County, he was surprised but not happy. He didn't mind enshrining her like a female bodhisattva. This was what he should do. It might not be a merit, but since ancient times, beauties were a source of trouble. If there was the slightest mistake, then wouldn't his originally smooth career come to an end? However, since His Highness the Crown Prince had spoken, Hong Shandong could only grit his teeth and squeeze out a smile to agree. That night, the governor tossed out an elegant residence with mountains and rivers. Su Fingnian had the men of sacrifice secretly greet the spies in Yanji County. The men of sacrifice were originally great spies who had accumulated great prestige. They were familiar with this kind of shady business and could handle it flawlessly. Afterwards, Su Fengnian abandoned the carriage, which was already redundant, and rode with Su Yanbing out of the city that very night. They hurried to the familiar Tuma Pass. When Pei Nanwei got off the carriage, she didn't forget to pick up the curtain hat. In the secluded residence with only 2 old servant girls, she stood in the courtyard without saying a word. It was only when she was about to go to bed that she threw the curtain hat in the courtyard. On the dressing cabinet in the room, she caught a glimpse of several boxes of exquisite and expensive rouge. She sneered and said, "It's all a burden." How many of the seemingly valuable items were actually valuable? Chapter 964. The East Sea Martial Emperor city had always been rumored to have 3 oddities. The oddities were that there were always more foreigners than locals in the city. The oddities were that the inner city wall was filled with weapons. The oddities were, of course, the number 2 in the world, who had lived for 100 years. To the people of Liang Jianghu, not having been to the martial emperor city meant that they had never been to the Jianghu. The first oddities were not strange. Every year, several second-grade master realm and even first-grade masters would try to climb the city wall, hoping to become famous. For example, the 9th Blades Huang Ascending Tower had attracted top masters like Chao Chongqing to watch the battle. As a result, the martial emperor city had attracted a large number of heroes who came to seek adventure. The second oddities were even more reasonable. If one failed to climb the tower, he had to leave his weapon on the wall. Old Monster Wang had dominated the martial emperor city for 60 years. In the first 10 years, he often had to accept 3 or 4 challenges a day. Over time, the wall was filled with heavenly weapons, including the contribution of the Donghua sword pool suzerain, Song Nianqing. The third oddities were why Wang Xianji, who was the number 1 in the world, still claimed to be the number 2 in the world. No one knew the inside story. There were many weapon shops, pawn shops, and martial arts arenas in the martial emperor city. This was even easier to explain. What else could one do in the martial emperor city if not fight to become famous? Many of the heroes of today's world had fought their way to fame when they were young. However, the martial arts arenas in the city had been quiet recently. Indeed, the strange sword that entered the city a few days ago was too confusing. Last year, Bimang had overstepped its authority and established a ranking of 10 people. Among the swordsmen, only the Peach Blossom Sword God, Dong Tai, was listed. However, it was rumored that he had gone to the sea to visit the Immortals and there was no news of him. However, there was a sword that had been hovering outside the martial emperor city for a long time. When all the Jianghu people in the city had lost their patience, the sword finally moved. It was discovered by a child who threw stones at the sword. When the child hurriedly ran back home to tell his father, the father rolled his eyes and ignored him. He just treated it as if he had missed the fun. It was Wang Xianji's 4th disciple, Lu Huang. He was 46 years old and had the sword, Bodhisattva Barbarian. Lu Huang could be said to be an exceptional sword art prodigy. He took a crooked path of abandoning the Tao in pursuit of skills. It was like a person walking with a limp. However, Lu Huang only walked with one leg and was already far ahead in the martial emperor's city. Wang Xianji once had the intention to let Lu Huang guard the pavilion when Song Nianqing ascended the pavilion for the second time. It was a pity that Song Nianqing had died suddenly. However, Lu Huang's attainment in sword arts was imaginable. Wang Xianji once had the intention to let Lu Huang guard the pavilion when Song Nianqing ascended the pavilion for the second time. It was a pity that Song Nianqing suddenly died. However, Lu Huang's attainment in sword arts was imaginable. Lu Huang sat cross-legged with his sword across his knees and waited for 2 hours. When the flying sword arrived at the city wall at the speed of a turtle, Lu Huang unsheathed his sword and used the tip of his sword to block the sword. However, the sword that entered the city was extremely weak. However, Lu Huang's Bodhisattva barbarian didn't seem to be affected at all. Lu Huang then stood up and rode the Bodhisattva barbarian. His body followed the unsheathed sword and retreated step by step. 6 hours later, Lu Huang's qi was exhausted and his tendons were broken. However, he still couldn't stop the nameless sword from trembling. In the next 6 hours, it was the city lord's third disciple, Linya, who took over the responsibility of blocking the sword. Linya was 32 years old and was also a beauty on the rouge scale. Her figure was as tall as the men from the northern lands. Her figure was majestic and had a unique charm that made people gasp in amazement. She was the world's #1 fist master. However, no matter how hard she punched the sword, she still couldn't stop the sword from moving forward at a constant speed. For the last punch, Linya soared into the sky and smashed down. The buildings within a radius of 100 feet below the sword were all smashed into pieces. The violent Linya obviously couldn't accept this result. She ran like crazy and carried a large cauldron back from the martial arts field. She smashed it onto the sword as if it was a joke to her. She still couldn't do anything. Linya sat on the ground dejectedly with a dull look in her eyes. Then, it was the Qi Refinement Grandmaster Gong Bonk's turn. As the oldest among Wang Xianji's 4 disciples, Gong Bonk was bald and had 9 rings on his head. Instead of wearing a kasaya, he wore a Daoist robe. It was rumored that he possessed the physique of a Buddha's Vajra, but he also possessed 6 types of Daoist finger mystic arts and was proficient in Qi Refinement mystical arts. Gong Bonk's moves were indeed dazzling. He didn't come into close contact with the sword like his junior martial brother Lu Huang and junior martial sister Linya. Instead, he stood in the inner city's pavilion. Every time he waved his sleeves, he would pick up a weapon from the wall. As a result, the martial emperor's city had to listen to 6 hours of thunderous sounds of bells and drums. Some of the citizens with weak inner strength were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. They all ran out of the city to seek refuge. Gong Bonk waved his 107 sleeves and picked up 107 weapons. 70 to 80% of them were destroyed in the collision. In the end, the sword was less than 20 feet away from the pavilion. The entire martial emperor city felt that even if the city lord were to personally make a move, he wouldn't be able to block the sword from entering the pavilion unless he used all his strength. Afterwards, Wang Xianji's eldest disciple, Grumyu, who rarely showed his face, stood in front of the sword. However, no one saw what really happened at the top of the city wall. Only after the outcome was revealed and the rumors were spread that Grumyu had struck out with his saber and blocked the unreasonable sword that sought not to be fast but to be slow. In fact, Yu Grum did not bring his saber at all. Instead, he floated in front of the long sword and slowly circled it. When the tip of the flying sword was less than 6 feet away from the attic, he stood in front of the long sword again, closed his eyes, and gently pressed his 2 fingers on the tip of the sword. At this moment, on the top floor of the attic, there was a scene that no one could imagine. The burly old monster Wang in hemp clothes and shoes stood at the window overlooking the city. Inside the attic sat the monster who ate swords. What was even more amusing was that the atmosphere in the attic was not tense at all. This was because the old monster-eating sword was sitting cross-legged and drinking a pot of wine. A half-squatting girl in green was pulling at the old monster's white eyebrows and tying them together seriously. The expression on her small face was unusually serious, and her movements were even more meticulous. The old monster-eating sword, whose real name was no longer known by the Jianghu, was not angry. Instead, he smiled and allowed the little girl to mess around. The way he looked at her was a little strange. When Yu Groom's feet left the ground and his body was suspended in the air, his 2 fingers finally pressed the tip of the sword down by half an inch. Wang Xianji nodded, turned around and sat opposite Sui Xiagu. The little girl in green raised her hand and shook the knot made by the white eyebrows. She smiled brightly at the city master of the martial emperor city as if she was asking for praise. Wang Xianji, who had never smiled in front of his 4 disciples, smiled slightly and waved his hand. The little girl in green shook her head. Obviously, the white eyebrows of the old grandpa were more interesting. She continued to squat and tie the knot carefully. The old monster-eating sword smiled and said, "You've done your best for Li Chungang. It's just that with his stubborn temper, he doesn't care about the reincarnation of Buddhism. He doesn't want to be a free and unfettered celestial being, nor is he willing to continue his fate in the afterlife. Li Chungang is Li Chungang. A lifetime of grievances, a lifetime of injustice, a lifetime of justice. This is the sword god that even you, Wang Xianji, are willing to admire. Li Chungang will die in every lifetime, so the green robe of Fengdu will die with him. As for Dong Tai, even if he returns from visiting immortals, his sword skills and sword path won't lose to Li Chungang. To you and me, he's still not as appetizing as Li Chungang." Wang Xianji said indifferently, "Yu Groom can only borrow the remaining power of half of building Wild Forest Crow Palace to block half of your sword. Why did you stop this sword?" The old monster-eating sword ignored him and lowered his head to smile at the little girl in green. "Little girl, go to the wall and get a good sword for this old grandpa to drink with." The little girl, who looked full of spiritual energy, raised her head and made an "oh" sound. She jogged out and obediently raised her butt to lie on the city wall. She pulled out a long sword with some difficulty and carried it back into the pavilion while holding the sword hilt with both hands. Sui Xiagu laughed heartily. He broke off an inch of the sword tip with 2 fingers and threw it into his mouth. Seeing the little girl in green looking at him eagerly as if she was craving for food, the old monster-eating sword laughed. "Don't learn from this old grandpa to eat swords. Otherwise, when you grow up, you'll scare away men." Sui Xiagu saw that the child continued to focus on his white eyebrows and said to Wang Xianji, "Since you let a few disciples block my sword, it's obvious that you don't want to fight with me. It's fine, I don't have the confidence to win now. I reckon that Dong Tai will be back soon. Compared to fighting with you, I'm more interested in knowing if it's worth it for Li Chungang to lend him his sword from 10,000 miles away. If I win against Dong Tai when he's at his peak, my chances of winning will be higher if I fight with you. However, according to your temper of not rejecting anyone, why would you let your disciple show his face like this? You don't look like an old man who's about to die. Why would you do something like entrusting an orphan to someone?" Chapter 965. Wang Xianji said calmly, "I'm waiting for the final battle. After that, I will ascend. After I leave, Wu City will cease to exist." At first, Han Xingxian wanted to learn from Gao Shulu and slaughter all the first grade 3 realm experts in Jianghu. Many scattered people fled to the city. After that, there was a rule that no one from Wu City would be included in the rankings. Among the 4 disciples including the groom, I planned to send Gong Bonk and Lu Huang to the capital, Linya to Nanjiang. As for the groom, I still haven't decided. However, Lu Yi will most likely be taken care of by him." Sui Xiagu stared. "From your tone, the final battle won't be between me and Dong Tai. It also won't be Chao Chongqing. Could it be Tuoba Bodhisattva?" Wang Xianji sneered, "That northern barbarian. eating dust behind me. As long as I, Wang Xianji, am alive, he won't be number one in the world. His martial arts cultivation now is only Wang Xianji's from 30 years ago. Even if he takes that weapon, it's only me from 20 years ago. What's there to fight? Sui Xiagu was puzzled. Qi Xuanzhen didn't want to fight with you. Later, Hong Shixiang, who had a chance to fight with you, also committed suicide. However, from what I see, these two, even one person, can't compare to their status 500 years ago. I'm afraid that for 500 years after Lu Dongxian, you, Wang Xianji, were invincible. For example, Lu Songtao, the sect leader of Zhulu Mountain whom I helped guard, was slightly inferior to Li Chungang. 200 years ago, Wu family's sword immortal master, Wu Doubing, was a hero who made a name for himself. He dominated Jianghu for 40 years. At most, he was another Lu Songtao. 400 years ago, the great demon Gao Shulu caused a catastrophe and killed all the top experts in Jianghu. Although he was skilled, he was only slightly stronger than the current Tuoba Bodhisattva. Today's Jianghu is very different from before. You, Tuoba Bodhisattva, Li Chungang, Dong Tai, and that white-clothed woman, any one of you, other than Gao Shulu's Jianghu, would be invincible in 100 years in Jianghu. Of course, me too. Wang Xianji sneered, it's all Huang Longshi's fault. The girl in green suddenly ran to Wang Xianji and asked curiously, Grandpa, why don't you call yourself this old man? Wang Xianji rubbed her head and pointed at Suishia Valley. She smiled and said, this fellow is more than 20 years older than grandfather. However, he is only older and does not have much ability. Sui Xiagu blew his beard and glared. He broke a section of the sword and threw it into his mouth. He said angrily, Wang Xianji, why don't we fight now? Wang Xianji merely glanced at Sui Xiagu and ignored him. The two white eyebrows of the sword-eating old man that had been tied into countless knots instantly straightened and fluttered in the air. The girl in green was anxious when she saw this. She quickly ran over and pulled down the two long eyebrows that were taller than her. She hugged them and continued to tie the knots patiently. Sui Xiagu sighed helplessly and asked, do you think that Qin Jibao can defeat the Gu Jiantang after he used the Dragon Tree Monk's death to become a Confucian saint? Wang Xianji shook his head. Sui Xiagu said with a puzzled expression, this kid is extremely talented and rare. Why did he go to Great Peace City to become the Minister of War? Why didn't he become a king and become a vassal of Western Shu? He would have a good state of mind and time to improve his cultivation. Wang Xianji smiled and said, Chen Jibao is equivalent to the Confucian saint, Chao Chongqing, who died in West Chu to revive the country. When the time comes, he will be able to borrow the momentum and win against Gu Jiantang. Only then will he have the right to fight me. Sui Xiagu was stunned and then sighed deeply, the younger generation will surpass us in time. Wang Xianji was silent. Sui Xiagu smiled and asked, let's not talk about the 10 people who are already in the martial arts rankings. Who do you think will be able to rise up in the next 50 years? Wang Xianji closed his eyes and said slowly, in terms of swords, Lu Baijie, whose Tongshi sword was eaten by you, originally had a good swordsmanship. However, he was a late bloomer and became the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. Wang Xiaoping was originally on the wrong path but now he is inseparable from Lu Songtao. He has both Q sword and Buddhism. His future is limitless. Qi Xianxia in the city used to be half a celestial at Mount Longhu but did not have a chivalrous character. After going to Mount Wudong and leaving the mountain, he has changed greatly. Wu Luding is too focused on winning and will not be able to go as far as the female sword servant Cui Hua. In terms of the blade, Yuan Suozong will definitely reach the celestial phenomenon realm. It is just a matter of time. As for Jiang Fuding, it's hard to say. His character is too evil but because his martial arts path is the most similar to mine, if he is unlucky, he will stay in Xianji for the rest of his life. If he is lucky, when I ascend, he will have a chance to become a land celestial. The head of the Wu family's sword tomb, Su Yanbing of Beiliang. The two from Mount Lantuo and Guanyin do not have a high chance of becoming the world's #1, but they have a chance to become land celestial. There are too many variables in the Jianghu now, and I dare not predict their final achievements. However, these people will at most be in the top 10. It's just that their positions are different. However, there are two people who are especially unpredictable. Nangong Puj of Tide Listening Pavilion, who uses a blade, and Jiang Si, the princess of West Chu, who has already comprehended the sword. However, the latter is likely to be a flash in the pan. Sui Xiagu remembered a name, Jiang Fuding. Wang Xianji said calmly, "Do you know my wish to practice martial arts?" Sui Xiagu frowned slightly, but the little girl was dragged by the snow-white eyebrows. Ancestor Qi Jian turned his head and smiled apologetically. The girl in green smiled back and waved her hand to indicate that it was fine. Wang Xianji placed her fists on her legs. "Do you know that Li Chungang, you, Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Tai, Chao Chongqing, your realms are not much different from mine. Why do you want to fight to the death? Why are you sure that you will lose?" Sui Xiagu laughed angrily. "Isn't it because you have thick skin?" The girl in green covered her mouth and laughed. Wang Xianji looked straight at Sui Xiagu and asked, "Do you believe that I can still kill all of you if the few of you join forces against me?" Sui Xiagu narrowed his eyes. He obviously did not believe it. But he had to believe it. Wang Xianji stood up. The top floor of the attic had no walls or windows blocking the east and west. Hence, one could see the East Sea from the east. Wang Xianji said softly, "After I, Wang Xianji, became an earth immortal from the martial Tao and not the heavenly Tao, I have always called myself the second in the world. Not everyone in the world can fight to the death with me. The reason for this is because I missed the Jianghu when Li Chungang was invincible." At that time, Wang Xianji looked up to that sword-wielding green robe and was convinced. It was him who made me understand the meaning of the Jianghu. It was Li Chungang who made me walk the path that I have walked for 60 years. If the Jianghu thinks that I am the second in the world because I am mocking the world, I will not deny it. Whoever has the ability can come and be the world's #1 in their eyes. Sui Xiagu waited for her to continue. Wang Xianji smiled, "But more importantly, the enemy in my heart is the entire world." Wang Xianji clenched her fists. Above the East Sea, the tides rose and fell. So even if the 9 people behind Wu Ping and all the rank 1 experts in the world gather at Wu Wu City, I, Wang Xianji, will not be afraid of losing. I will only win. Sui Xiagu pulled his eyebrows out of the child's hands. The girl in green jumped up and down, trying to catch the 2 white eyebrows. Wang Xianji loosened her fists and stood with her hands behind her back. The East Sea returned to calmness. If Jiang Fuding did not die in Beiliang, he would have the spirit to be the enemy of the entire Jianghu. Only then would he have the awareness to be the enemy of the world. At that time, the Jianghu would be his and Nangong Push's Jianghu. At most, there would be a Hong Jingyan. You, Suatia Valley, are hung up on your sword. Chao Zhangqing is hung up on the woman who observed the chess. You all have your own obsessions in your hearts. Instead, you are not as relaxed as the heartless Jiang Fuding. However, your obsessions are coincidentally the foundation for you to become top martial artists. What is even more helpless is that even if you can disperse everything and rise again, you are still unwilling to give up. Sui Xiagu mocked, "Do you think everyone is a martial arts fanatic like you?" Gao Shulu had only reached the legendary celestial immortal realm by deliberately causing her cultivation to go berserk. Old monster Wang, you really are a monster. I am puzzled. Why didn't any divine immortals come down to subdue you? If not, a few thousand bolts of lightning would be enough to strike you to death. Wang Xianji laughed it off. Divine immortals. Forget about Dharma form. They could even kill ordinary earth immortals. Wang Xianji did not even care about them. Even if their real bodies came to the human world, they would still have to follow Wang Xianji's rules. Sui Xiagu wiped his brows with his fingertips and asked, "Then who are you going to fight the last battle in the human world with?" Wang Xianji asked back, "Who did you borrow your sword from?" Sui Xiagu raged, "Bullsh *t. Do you think I don't know how strong that Su kid is? He was able to kill Han Xingxian because of my 1,000-mile sword manipulation. If he focused on the Jianghu, he might be able to reach my level. But he has to be the king of Beiliang. How can he be like you, Wang Xianji, who is so focused on martial arts? Not to mention 10 years, even if you give him 100 years, he will not be qualified to be your opponent in the last battle." Wang Xianji said calmly, "I was pushed back 1,000 feet by his 2 punches." Sui Xiagu's eyes widened. The girl in green also widened her eyes. The old and the young were exactly the same. Wang Xianji said slowly, "If he dares to step into the divine immortal realm, I will kill him immediately." Chapter 966. The Tuma Pass was especially cold this year. Although it wasn't to the point where young people were frozen to death, there were still some lonely old people in the villages near the pass who managed to survive the winter with great difficulty. However, they didn't manage to survive the cold that was said to be the gates of hell by the common people. However, this kind of silent death wouldn't cause any waves. Anyway, if they didn't die in the turmoil of war, they would die of old age on their beds at home. Who would be willing to care about them? Only some retired old soldiers could be casually arranged by the government. They could be considered to have died of old age. Compared to Liang, they were already very lucky. The two rode to the Tuma Pass and rested for a while before leaving the pass. Taking advantage of the lingering charm of the Lantern Festival, the pass market was still quite lively. The children were all staring intently at the old crow playing chess and other games. The travel-worn Su Fengnian was chewing on a big flatbread as he led the horse forward. His sharp eyes saw a familiar-looking chubby boy among the children. He walked over and lightly kicked the chubby boy's butt. The boy was so engrossed in watching that he didn't even turn his head to look at the thing that kicked his butt. The chubby boy angrily turned his head and was about to curse when he saw that it was a handsome young master leading a horse and carrying a sword. He was stunned for a moment before finally recognizing that it was the knight who gave him a meat bun. He quickly stood up and saluted according to the etiquette taught by the private school teacher. The Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Where's Yusong? Didn't he play with you?" The chubby boy looked around and said with a smile, "He was here just now. Song Zi came to the market with his mother to buy some satin. Now his mother must have pulled him away by the ear." "Young master, do you want me to help you call for Song Zi?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "No need. I have to leave the pass immediately. You can go back and tell Song when you see him." Then, he saw the chubby boy swallow his saliva and stare at the half-eaten meat bun in his hand. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "If you don't mind being bitten by me, take it." The little fatty smiled shyly and shook his head vigorously. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of 2 sabers of different lengths hanging on the young master's waist. He became even more envious. Su Fengnian handed the child a meat loaf. While the child was chewing on the meat loaf, he mumbled, "Young master, I heard from my father that it is very difficult to come out of the closed door now. It seems that there are many, many soldiers outside the Fallen Horse Pass. Around the end of the year, not many people have entered the pass." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I have some connections with the officials who are in charge of closing the door, so I am not afraid." The chubby boy smiled innocently and said, "I knew it. Young master, you must be a big shot. Pine Zi often talked about you in the private school, but no one believed him. Only I helped Pine Z and said together with Pine Z that you are a hero who roamed the Jianghu. Su Fingnian rubbed the chubby boy's head and turned to leave. Behind him, the chubby boy immediately bragged to his playmates about how familiar he was with the young master who had a horse and a saber. Most of the children who had studied together in the private school did not believe that he was with Zhao Yusong. Now that they had seen the chubby boy get half a meat loaf as a reward, this friendship could not be faked. The chubby boy's Jianghu status suddenly rose by several levels. The military parade of the Beiliang Frontier Army had been held for nearly 20 years. It had always followed the old rule of holding a small military parade every year and a big military parade every 3 years. However, last year's big military parade was delayed to this year for no reason. It was also set at the beginning of spring, which had never happened before. 2 rules were broken in succession. In addition, the scale of this military parade was particularly large, which made many border soldiers feel an unusual atmosphere. The small border pass, Tuma Pass, was small, but there were many bodhisattvas. If Deputy Commander Zhou Xian and Han Tao, who had the meritorious rank of Hanging Bao Commandant by his side, wanted to smoothly enter and exit the pass, especially if the goods were valuable, they had to be careful of these 2 sworn enemies. At this moment, the local tyrants of Tuma Pass, Zhou Xian and Han Tao, were standing respectfully on top of the wall. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. Not to mention the 2 local tyrants who had just entered the ranks, even a dragon would obediently lie down. This was because beside them stood 2 big bodhisattvas who could decide a person's life and death with a single word. The deputy commander of Yuzhou, Shi Qiangao, and the special commander of Yuzhou, Li Guiweng, were both 3rd-rank officials. At this moment, Han Tao and Zhou Xian, these 2 old enemies, no longer had any intention of making things difficult for each other. They could only pinch their noses and cooperate, thinking about how to deal with this mission. They did not have the ability to know the inside story. They only received news that an important person was coming out of Tuma Pass. Deputy Commander Zhou Ziru, the son of Deputy Commander Zhe, had the status of a border soldier, so he was also able to stand on top of the wall and wait. However, he was very far away from the 2 powerful officials of Yuzhou. This border general, who had once almost wiped out the fish dragon gang in an instant, cautiously glanced at Shi Qiangao's bright armor, as well as Li Guiweng's official uniform patch embroidered with a peacock design. His eyes were filled with awe and passion. Shi Qiangao was a veteran general. He was old but vigorous. This time, he was the most promising candidate to become a general of Yuzhou. In the end, Huang Fuqing, who was only a military officer at that time, beat him to it. The people of Tuma Pass were trembling with fear, mostly because of this reason. They were afraid that Shi Qiangao, with his fiery temper, would vent his anger on them. On the other hand, Li Guiweng had always been as amiable to everyone as the rumors said. When climbing the wall, he intentionally walked behind Shi Qiangao and took the time to exchange a few warm words with Zhou Xian and Zhou Ziru. For some reason, Zhou Ziru carefully noticed that even General Shi Qiangao, who had a completely different personality, was somewhat nervous. This time, they chose to read Beiliang at the mouth of the gourd. Chu Lushan, the governor of Beiliang, had already arrived outside the pass. Yan Wenwand, the commander-in-chief of the infantry, and Yuan Zuozong, the commander of the cavalry, had already arrived outside the pass early. The new nobleman of Beiliang, great ancestor Gu, as well as the general of Liangzhou and his 2 deputy generals, who were not part of the border army, had also rushed north on the 3rd and 4th day of the 1st lunar month. Even the administrator of Beiliang, Li Gongda, was no exception. It could be said that almost all of the big shots in Beiliang had arrived at the mouth of the gourd around the Lantern Festival. Zhou Ziru could not guess who could make Shi Qiangao and Li Guiweng treat them so cautiously. Although the general of Yuzhou, Huang Fuqing, who did not have a solid foundation, was half a rank higher than them, he should not have such prestige. At Tuma Pass, Shi Qiangao and Li Guiwang were naturally waiting for His Royal Highness. Actually, Su Fengnian could have entered the Tumbling Horse Pass earlier, but he was stopped by a wandering Daoist, who shamelessly wanted to tell his fortune and palm. He swore that not only did he not want to pay if his fortune was not accurate, he even had to pay for it. Su Fengnian calmly glanced at Su Yanbing. For the first time, the latter did not immediately give an answer. Su Fengnian was somewhat amused. To be able to make Su Yanbing unable to tell the depth of the Taoist, either this sloppy Taoist really did not have any internal energy, or he was a heavenly phenomenon expert who was good at disguising himself, or he was directly an earth immortal. What a big prize! Su Fengnian smiled as he followed the shifty-eyed old Taoist to sit in front of a roadside stall. He went straight to the point and teased, "Old Jinren, with your appearance, it's very difficult for people to believe that you're an expert." The old Taoist sighed and said, "It's just like my name, it's all given by my parents. What can I do? I'm really hungry and cold, so I have no choice but to set up this stall to make a dangerous living as a fortune teller. The secrets of heaven cannot be revealed, but if I don't earn money, I'll starve to death. I'm using my life to exchange for a life, no matter how you look at it, it's still a bitter life." Su Fengnian was about to speak, but the old Taoist seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. He sighed and said, "Only when the secrets of heaven leak out one can it revolve endlessly. This one, in my opinion, is myself. Therefore, young master, please don't ask me why I'm good at fortune-telling, but I can't tell my own fate." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Old Jinren, let's not talk about other things, but your observation skills are quite good." The old Taoist who called himself Four Directions stared and said, "How is this observation? I've clearly seen through your thoughts. The right time, the right place, and the right people, I can calculate the heavens, the earth, and the human heart. I'm different from those immortals who came from the ancestral court of Taoism. I don't calculate the heavens, I only calculate the human heart." Chapter 967. Su Fengnian was surprised and said with a smile, "Then I'll have to take the opportunity to ask Taoist Master. If Buddha cannot be said and Tao cannot be said, then how can ordinary people become Buddha and attain Tao?" The old Taoist and Su Fengnian sat across from each other across the stall. He twirled his beard and said, "I won't talk about the truth of words, but I'll just talk about some of the truths I've comprehended. How about it? Young master, you don't care about trifles, but you can be more magnanimous when it comes to big matters. I think you can calm down and listen to me." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Okay." He turned to Su Yanbing and said, "Go buy a tray of steamed buns." The old Taoist nodded with satisfaction. It was unknown whether he was satisfied with the tray of steamed buns or that the young master in front of him had finally entered the trap. When Su Yanbing silently turned around, the old Taoist straightened his clothes and said slowly, "Cultivation is like climbing a mountain. The more you walk, the harder it is. Mount Longhu only wants to reach the top, as if it would be a disgrace to their ancestors if they don't have an ascended Taoist every 60 years. This is not right or wrong, but Mount Wudang doesn't cultivate this kind of Tao. I don't know when it started, but people only focus on the word longevity. What's the difference between this and being an official and looking forward to the word first rank? For us, cultivation is like reading books. Just like those novels about scholars and beauties that young masters read, in the end, it's still about getting to know each other at first sight. Reading those novels about scholars and beauties, in the end, it's still about getting to know each other at first sight. If you're lucky, you'll be in love with each other until your hair turns white. If you're unlucky, you'll hate each other and leave each other. If you're more explicit, a person's life is even more miserable, it's just about life and death. It's too boring to think about it this way. What do you think, young master?" Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, "I think so too." The old Taoist continued, "In my opinion, when a person is reincarnated, the essence of walking is the word walk. Walking through mountains, rivers, Jianghu, east, west, north, and south, it doesn't matter where you go. Along the way, you'll meet interesting people and boring things. Whether it's suffering or enjoying happiness, it's all just once in 100 years. When you meet a good scenery, you can stop and take a look. When you have strength, you can continue. If you don't want to move, then don't move. Gentle and soft, hero's grave. Those are just people who can't eat grapes and are complaining that they are sour. Why do you say that they only admire mandarin ducks and not immortals? I've been in this world, for a long time, a day, 1,000 years, 1,000 years in the world, 1,000 years, a day, 1,000 years, 1,000 years, year, a 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 year. But to be a year, in In my life, I've been to more than 600 Taoist temples, big and small. I've also been to more than 300 temples to seek advice from the monks about Buddhism. Seeing that Su Fingnian was silent, the old Taoist coughed and reminded him in a low voice, "Young master, you should say something to make sense." Su Fingnian smiled and said, "I'm busy calculating how old you are now, old Taoist master, to be able to finish visiting the 600 Taoist temples and 300 temples." The old Taoist shook his head and sighed, "I've long forgotten. I only remember that I married 3 women." Su Fingnian couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. At this moment, Su Yambing brought back a tray of steamed buns and placed it on the stall. The old Taoist picked up a steaming steamed bun and blew on it fiercely before swallowing it whole. His face was filled with intoxication as he lifted his sleeve to wipe the oil stains on the corner of his mouth. He smiled and said, "My muscles and bones are frozen in spring and my meat is frozen in autumn. Even if I'm young and vigorous, I'm not afraid of the cold in spring." Su Fingnian smiled and asked, "Old Taoist master, can you calculate who I'm going to meet?" The old Taoist master was about to grab the second steamed bun when he said casually, "Old woman painted gray." Su Yanbing's breath froze. The old Taoist master was still indifferent. He smiled softly and said, "In the Jianghu, it's never a burden to have more skills. That's why I know a little about everything. I only know this because of my age. It's not much of a skill." Su Fingnian said calmly, "I know who you are, old Taoist master. It's just that Taoist master doesn't seem to follow the rules if he doesn't show his face." "Why? Do you want to avenge your Beimang Empress by using my head to repay the debt of Su Huainan and Diwu Raccoon's heads?" The old Taoist smiled and said, "Do you really know who I am?" Su Fingnian frowned and said, "I'm really confused. I heard that Li Xiaoxin of the 2 Zen temples had already pulled down the hovering mountain to crush the Qilin immortal who was carrying a sword." The old Taoist master laughed and flicked his fingers on his left shoulder. A young Taoist with a charming appearance floated out of his right hand. He was about 27 or 28 years old and carried a long sword on his back. He bowed to Su Fingnian with his hands folded. The old Taoist flicked his fingers and another old Taoist floated out from his left. He had a sage-like demeanor and held a horsetail whisk in his hand. He twirled his beard and smiled. This Qilin immortal had clearly been killed by Tuoba Bodhisattva at the Yellow River after crossing the river. The old Taoist master who had been sitting on the stool clapped his hands and a young Taoist priest ran out in front of him. It was the child who appeared beside the king of the North Courtyard, Su Huainan. The old Taoist master held a bun in one hand and stroked the little Taoist boy's head with the other. "Su Fingnian, this is the second time we've met." The scene here was strange, but the passers-by on the street were unaware of it. The old Taoist master swallowed the bun and clapped his hands. He smiled and said, "The 3 state advisors of Beimang were killed by Li Xiaoxin, Tuoba Bodhisattva, and Yi Ilio respectively. They were only dead but not dead. It's not enough for outsiders to know. After killing the 3 corpses and pulling out the 9 worms, the saint did not explain it in detail. The people were confused and confused. I wandered around and thought that it was the reason of my past life, present life, and future life. These 3 Chilean immortals of the Tao sect were me and not me. I was them without a doubt. They were very busy but I was very free. I was so free that I wandered around Beimang for 360 years. I was so free that I saw the 3 married women slowly grow from young to old women. I was so free that I even met the 4th ancestor Liu. Su Fingnian seemed to not know what to say and could only reach out to take a bun to calm down. He did not expect that the young state advisor who was playing around his knees would slap it away. He felt a burning pain on the back of his hand. Su Fingnian was stunned and quickly waved his hand to signal Su Yanbing, who was already filled with murderous intent, to not make a move. The old Taoist master knocked on the little immortal Chilean's head and bent down to pick up the bun and pass it to His Royal Highness. Reading books and chasing the deer. How much you gain from reading books is how much you lose from chasing the deer. Taoism is to Qingshan. There is nothing outside Taoism, but Qingshan has something. I'm called Taoist Master Sifang. My real name is Yuan Qingshan. I've been cultivating for 360 years and am about to ascend. I do have a favor to ask of you today. Su Fingnian reached out his left hand to take the bun and did not tremble at all. Yuan Qingshan said seriously, I'm asking for a copper coin from His Royal Highness for a nameless disciple of Taoism sect. Su Fingnian held the bun and did not move at all. The old Taoist master smiled and said, Your Highness can reply after tasting the bun. Su Fingnian hesitated for a moment and followed the old Taoist master to swallow the bun in one mouth. He slapped the copper coin on the stall. The old Taoist master picked up the copper coin and flicked his finger. The copper coin flew thousands of miles away. Standing up, the 3 Chilean state advisors merged into the body of the Taoist master with the surname Yuan. Before the sloppy old Taoist left, he left 4 words of advice. Your Highness, go to Mount Wudong more often. It's beneficial and harmless. Su Longxiang was destined to die. Before I ascend, I'll leave him a chance to live, but it's only a chance. Jinwu was originally a celestial. Why did he come to the mortal world? You'll die if you underestimate Wang Xianji, who won't lose to Jinwu in the future. After Li Yufu used up his merit and fortune to help others ascend, he killed all the immortals fishing in the clouds. Therefore, no one in the world can ascend. People in the mortal world do things in the mortal world. I, Yuan Qingshan, am not as good as Wudong's Li Yufu.